Chapter 29. An Awkward Misunderstanding 1. He Changdi went completely still thanks to Chu Lian's actions. He stared at her with a dark expression on his face. He was absolutely certain that this young, beautiful wife before him was the same Chu Lian from his previous life, because they looked exactly the same. However, why was there such a difference in their personalities? The wicked woman, Chu Lian from his previous life, would never have come this close to him. If she had to choose between him and Xiao Bojian, she would have picked Xiao Bojian without any hesitation. However, if she wasn't Chu Lian from his previous life, why would she meet in secret with Xiao Bojian? The more he Sanlang pondered, the darker the look in his eyes. Finally, he inwardly shook his head and laughed at himself. Of course, she was the same wicked woman as before. She simply learned how to hide her true self better this time. Chu Lian noticed the sudden change in He Sanlang's face, so she stopped trying to tease him and sat properly by his side. He Changdi brushed away some non-existent dirt on his clothes. Then, intending to ridicule her, he said, "It's only been 3 days since we've gotten married. Who would have known that my dear wife had someone else in her thoughts this whole time?" Chu Lian frowned as she turned to look at He Sanlang. "My dear husband, what are you talking about? I can't seem to understand you." "Humph. I didn't realize that you'd gotten better at acting. Chu Lian, let's see how long you'll keep this up for." Right after he finished speaking, He Sanlang sat in the corner with his eyes closed, clearly ignoring Chu Lian. He treated the pretty little wife by his side as if she was made of air. Chu Lian didn't bother herself with him. He Sanlang obviously had a huge bias against her. Trying to make nice with him now would only cause the opposite effect. Why not simply ignore him and take a break? She was pretty tired from spending the whole day making conversation with the womenfolk of Haosingwa. After all, Chu Lian sunk into silence, but the rage in He Changdi's heart only grew. He sneered in his heart. Heh. As expected, although she had been acting as if she didn't care, she was still thinking about Xiao Wujing in her heart. Let's see how long you can keep pretending. Sooner or later, the day will come when Xiao Wujing falls into his hands. By then, I'd like to see if Chu Lian could still remain calm. Chu Lian wasn't thinking as deeply as he was. She had been completely tired out by the visit today. The carriage rode stably over the broad, paved roads. The gentle shaking lulled Chu Lian to sleep in no time at all. He Sanlang had his eyes closed as he mulled over things in his head. Suddenly, something heavy fell onto his shoulder, and he could feel slow, regular breaths blowing against his neck. He immediately froze. Upon opening his eyes, he cast a deep, darkened gaze downward, only to see Chu Lian sleeping defenselessly on his shoulder. The woman by his side had a serene expression on in her sleep, her lips slightly tilted upwards. She looked like a defenseless child. If he hadn't seen how ruthless she could be in his previous life, he might have thought that she could be a good wife to him. As his thoughts ran back to the various events that had happened in the past, the calm and gentle expression on He Sanlang's face disappeared in a flash. He tried to shuffle away in disdain, but Chu Lian was like jelly, clinging onto him. He Changdi couldn't bear with it any longer and reached out to push at her. After Chu Lian's head was pushed away, she frowned in dissatisfaction and mumbled something he couldn't make out before rolling back onto He Sanlang's body. His mouth twitched and he quickly dodged her. This time, Chu Lian didn't land on his shoulder. Instead, her head fell onto his thigh. He Sanlang was completely speechless towards this woman. She managed to sleep through all of that like a dead pig, so why couldn't she just sleep herself to death? This time, He Sanlang was too lazy to bother with her. Chapter 30. An Awkward Misunderstanding 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Chu Lian slept especially well while lying on He Sanlang's thigh. After about an hour, as they were about to reach the entrance of the Jing'an estate, He Sanlang suddenly felt something wet on his thigh. He lowered his gaze to look and found that it was actually Chu Lian's drool. He Sanlang. Although he tried to suppress the building rage within his chest, he couldn't hold back any longer. He Sanlang pushed Chu Lian away with enough force to make the sleeping Chu Lian almost fall onto the carpet of the carriage. This time, Chu Lian jolted awake. She looked around in confusion before realizing that she was still in the carriage. There was some suspicious wetness at the corner of her mouth. Chu Lian blushed deeply before taking out a handkerchief and quickly wiping it off. Next, she noticed that He Changdi was looking at her with anger, and maybe even the slight hint of a grudge. She faintly recalled that she had been sleeping on He Changdi's thigh, and she had been drooling. Her eyes couldn't resist drifting in the direction of He Changdi's thigh. It was close to summer now, and the weather was turning warm, so they were all wearing cool spring clothes. He Changdi was wearing a thin, light blue robe with embroidered flowers. It looked both low-key and luxurious, matching his calm, aloof aura perfectly. From afar, he looked like a mountain flower that no one could profane. However, on that completely unwrinkled silk brocade robe of his, there was a wet patch about half the size of a palm near the crotch area. The position was a little awkward, and it would be extremely easy for others to misunderstand. If it had been a dark-colored robe, it wouldn't have been too obvious, but the wet patch stood stark against the light-colored robe. It only took one glance for Chu Lian to realize she had caused some trouble this time. The corner of her eye twitched. She hurriedly hid in the corner like an ostrich, moving as far away from He Changdi as she could and pretending she hadn't seen anything. He Changdi's expression had turned completely black. He had the sudden urge to beat Chu Lian up, but he had never hit a woman before. It was part of the He family principles to never harm a lady. He snatched the handkerchief in Chu Lian's hands away and scrubbed at the suspicious mark on his robe. However, he didn't realize that Chu Lian had already used the handkerchief to wipe her mouth, so he ended up making the wet patch even bigger. He Changdi threw the handkerchief to the floor. This time, his face was so black, it could probably drip ink. Google Tag. Command Push Function. Google Tag. Display. Div GPT add 1505873300429-0. He was about to ridicule Chu Lian when he heard Lai Wei announce from outside the carriage, "Third young master, third young madam, we've reached the entrance of the estate. Senior servant Liu and eldest young madam are waiting to welcome us at the entrance." Following that, the carriage came to a stop. Since eldest sister-in-law had personally come out to welcome the couple back home, it would be rude if they didn't get out of the carriage to meet her. He Changdi's hopes of ordering Lai Yue to drive the carriage all the way back to their courtyard were dashed. The atmosphere in the carriage was tense and strange. Chu Lian couldn't withstand the deathly look that He Sanlang was sending her, so she pushed aside the curtains of the carriage and alighted. Lady Zhou was already waiting by the side of the carriage. Matriarch He had been worried that He Sanlang might have drunk too much at the Ingguo estate, so she had sent her eldest granddaughter-in-law and senior servant Liu out to receive them. When Lady Zhou saw Shiyin helping Chu Lian out of the carriage, she was stunned for a moment. Following that, a blush spread on her face. Senior servant Liu coughed twice, a smile shining in her eyes. Chu Lian didn't know why they seemed to be trying but failing to hold back their smiles upon seeing her. The attentive Shiyin had also flushed red. She hurriedly tidied up Chu Lian's clothes and adjusted the accessories on her head. By this time, He Sanlang had finally alighted from the carriage after dawdling as much as he could. After noticing Chu Lian's disorderly appearance, Lady Zhou and senior servant Liu couldn't help but glance at He Sanlang. When they saw the wet patch on He Sanlang's clothes, Lady Zhou almost choked on air while senior servant Liu's eyes merely crinkled upwards. She was already an old woman. There was nothing she hadn't seen before. She reacted quickly and walked to He Sanlang's side to help block the onlookers' gazes. He Sanlang's hands were trembling with the force of his rage. He wanted to strangle Chu Lian on the spot. It was all that wicked woman's fault. He had been completely embarrassed in front of his seniors. TL note, how embarrassing coughs. Chapter 31. Fire in the Kitchen, 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Chu Lian finally realized what happened. Eldest sister-in-law and senior servant Liu had made their own conclusions about what had gone on during the ride back to the estate. She had just woken up from a deep sleep, and since she had been eager to get off the carriage, she hadn't noticed her appearance. And then when He Sanlang had jumped off the carriage looking like that, what else were they supposed to think? She secretly glanced at He Changdi. When Chu Lian saw the stormy expression on his face, she hunkered down a little. She really hadn't done it on purpose. She hoped that Sanlang could forgive her. Senior servant Lu personally escorted them back to their courtyard. Before she left, she even took care to give Changdi some indiscreet advice. I know the two of you are newlyweds, but third young madam is still young. Third young master, please restrain yourself a little. Changdi had almost forgotten about the matter after he had changed into a fresh set of clothes. After getting this kind reminder from senior servant Lu, his rage returned. He waited for senior servant Lu to leave before glaring at Chu Lian and retreating to the study. After Sanlang left, Chu Lian wailed in distress and sat on the window seat. Xian hid her smile. Senior servant Gue had already found out what happened. She walked over to Chu Lian and passed her a cup of warm water. After coughing once, she asked Chu Lian lightly, "Third young madam, did you and third young master?" Before Xian could finish her sentence, Chu Lian had already turned to look up at senior servant Gue, greatly aggrieved. She then explained everything that had happened inside the carriage, having no other choice but to fight her embarrassment in order to clear the misunderstanding. It was only then that Xian found out the truth. She couldn't hold back anymore and let out her laughter. Chu Lian rested her chin on her arms and looked out the window. She intended to admire as much of the fading spring scenery as she could, studiously ignoring senior servant Gue and Xian's ceaseless laughter. So there had been such a huge misunderstanding. No wonder third young master was wearing such an ugly expression, senior servant Gue thought to herself. Senior servant Gue was used to Chu Lian's personality and knew that she didn't like others laughing at her. So she tried to regain control of herself by asking, "Third young madam, what would you like to eat?" This old servant will be heading to the main kitchen in a bit, and will fetch anything third young madam fancies. Chu Lian had been daydreaming when she suddenly heard senior servant Gue mention a trip to the main kitchen. It was only then that she remembered a certain event in the novel. There would be a fire in the Jing'an Estate's main kitchen today. Eldest sister-in-law, Lady Zhou, had been injured in that fire. Chu Lian thought for a bit before hurriedly getting up. "Momo, I haven't seen what the main kitchen in our estate looks like. I'll go with you." Senior servant Gue hesitated for a moment. "Third young madam, you've just come back from the Ingwer estate. Why don't you have a good rest?" Chu Lian saw that senior servant Gue didn't seem too willing to let her follow along, so she quickly shook senior servant Gue's arm like a spoiled child. Senior servant Gue couldn't withstand her pleading when she acted like this, so she could only shake her head and give in. "All right, let's go, let's go. Xian, come with us as well. Third young madam can take a walk in the gardens outside the kitchen. When it's this close to mealtimes, there'll be too many servants coming in and out, so please don't enter the kitchen, third young madam." Chu Lian nodded and agreed before following senior servant Gue and Xian out to the main kitchen of the Jing'an estate. Google Tag. Command Push, Function, Google Tag. Display, div GPT, add 1505873300429-0. The main kitchen was located in a second-tier building in the west part of the estate. It took about 7 minutes to even walk there. Chu Lian was a little anxious, so she walked faster. It wasn't until they were close to the main kitchen and there was no sign of any thick smoke that Chu Lian heaved a huge sigh of relief. Senior servant Gue was wondering why third young madam seemed to be acting a little oddly. Since Chu Lian settled down when they were about to reach their destination, she didn't ask about her weird behavior. "Third young madam, please wait in the garden. This old servant will come back to report to you after I take a look over there," senior servant Gue said, smiling as she spoke. Chu Lian nodded, and didn't forget to give her a reminder at the same time. "Momo, go quickly. It's getting late." Senior servant Gue patted Chu Lian's hand to reassure her. She then headed for the main kitchen, using large strides to hasten her pace. Chapter 32. Fire in the Kitchen, 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. The garden was tastefully arranged. Beside the flower patches stood 2 fake decorative mountains, and next to them were a few sets of stone tables and stools fit for sitting. Not too far away was a small lotus pond, lush with verdant lotus leaves. Some water lilies had been planted near the edge, and 2 or 3 of them had already bloomed, perching delicate and white upon the green of their pads. It made quite the pretty picture. Xian brought Chu Lian over to rest on the stone stools. Third young madam, those white water lilies are really beautiful. Chu Lian wasn't in the mood for flower viewing. She was concentrating on searching for Lady Zhou's figure, which should be appearing on the road to the main kitchen any moment now. As expected, Lady Zhou eventually came hurrying over from beyond the begonia trees. Xian showed her doubts on her face. Third young madam, eldest young madam seems to have gone to the main kitchen as well. Chu Lian hurriedly walked over. Sister-in-law, sister-in-law. Lady Zhou, accompanied by a maidservant, paused for a moment and looked over. Sister-in-law, what are you doing here? Chu Lian could only lower her head, pretending to be bashful and slightly embarrassed. I came to see if there's anything to eat for tonight. Lady Zhou smiled upon hearing so. Although you're already a married woman, you're only 15 years old. It's normal to be a little peckish. Just tell eldest sister-in-law what you like to eat. Eldest sister-in-law will get the servants in the main kitchen to cook it for you. When Chu Lian turned to look towards the kitchens and realized that senior servant Gue hadn't come out yet, she quickly sent Xian to call her back. Eldest sister-in-law, you looked like you were hurrying somewhere. Are you heading to the main kitchen too? Lady Zhou sighed. Mother isn't feeling very well today. She couldn't get up, even by late afternoon. I'm here to brew some medicine for her. Chu Lian furrowed her brows. The book hadn't mentioned that Countess Jingen's condition would worsen today. However, she couldn't bother with it right now. Countess Jingen still had a few more years of life in her. She wouldn't die today. Right now, the most urgent task was to stop Lady Zhou from entering the main kitchen. Seeing that Lady Zhou was about to go, Chu Lian hurriedly tugged on her sleeve. Eldest sister-in-law, how's mother now? What's her condition like today? Should we invite an imperial physician to check on her? Although Lady Zhou was in a hurry, seeing that her younger sister-in-law's face was full of worry, she couldn't leave her alone. She could only stop for a moment and explain everything to Chu Lian. When Chu Lian spotted Xian and senior servant Gue exiting together, it felt like a stone had been lifted from her heart. At the same time, the sound of a great explosion came from the direction of the main kitchen, and following that, the building was lit aflame. Although Chu Lian already knew that something was going to happen, she didn't know that it would be an explosion like this. For a moment, she was stunned and rooted to the spot. Lady Zhou, on the other hand, jumped in fright and quickly ordered her maidservant to call people from the outer court to put out the fire. She thanked her lucky stars that she had been talking to her younger sister-in-law here and hadn't entered the main kitchen. Google Tag. Command Push Function Google Tag. Display div GPT add 1505873300429-0. When she turned around, the first thing she saw was a teary-eyed Chu Lian. Lady Zhou's heart ached for her young sister-in-law. Chu Lian was still at a tender age. She had only gone to the kitchens because she was feeling a little peckish, but before she had even found a snack, a huge incident like this had happened. She must be scared silly. Lady Zhou softly tried to reassure her. Third sister-in-law? Don't be scared. I've already sent someone to call for the water hoses to put out the fire. Those servants will be fine. It's dangerous here. Why don't you head back to your own courtyard first? After saying so, she turned to face senior servant Gue and Xian, who had just walked over. Why are you two still in a daze? Hurry up and send your young madam back to her courtyard for some rest. Chu Lian finally regained her senses and said, Eldest sister-in-law, I'm fine. Please be careful here. I'll go back first. She had just walked out from behind a fake mountain when she bumped into Changdi, who had just rushed over from the inner court. Changdi noticed her hesitant expression. His heart thumped hard, knocking against his rib cage as he quickly instructed Liyue to bring more people over to the rescue. After remembering that his eldest sister-in-law had been injured in this exact great fire, Sanlang quickly rushed over to Qingxi Hall. Chapter 33. High Evaluation 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Chu Lian was about to call out to him, but before she could, Sanlang had already turned around, his face contorted into an angry mask. With quickened footsteps, he rounded the corner and disappeared. Senior servant Gue sighed when she saw this. Third young madam, let's head back to our courtyard first. Eldest young madam is here, so everything will be settled just fine. And after he saw the situation, third young master must have gone to the outer court for additional help as well. We should head back. Chu Lian puffed up her cheeks and frowned in the direction that He Changdi had disappeared in. She felt that He Sanlang had left in far too much of a hurry. Besides, it didn't seem like he had gone to ask for more help at all. Wasn't he heading in the direction of Matriarch He's Qingxi Hall? Never mind, she had already done her part here, and had indeed suffered quite a shock just now. It was probably better to go back and rest. On the other hand, with the speed he was going, He Changdi had quickly reached Qingxi Hall. The news of the fire hadn't reached Qingxi Hall yet. Currently, senior servant Lu was instructing two maidservants as they trimmed a few flower branches. When she saw He Changdi rush in like his pants had been set on fire, she hurriedly walked up to welcome him. Third young master, what's going on? Where's grandmother? He Changdi sounded extremely anxious. The matriarch is resting in her bedroom. Third young master, if your matter isn't too urgent, why don't you wait in the parlor for a moment? He Sanlang couldn't care less for niceties. He charged right into matriarchy's bedroom. The moment he entered, he started shouting, "Grandmother, quick, send someone to the palace with your token and request for an imperial physician." Matriarchy slept lightly in her old age. The moment He Changdi had intruded into her bedroom, she had already awakened. With the help of one of her personal maidservants, she sat up and leaned against the headboard to glare at this third grandson of hers. "You're already a grown man. Why are you still running around like a little brat? Who in our household has fallen sick? So sick that they need a token to summon an imperial physician? Is it your wife?" It was clear that matriarch was in a good mood. Despite the rude wake-up call, she freely teased He Sanlang in her own gentle manner. By the time the maidservant helped matriarch put on a sleeveless outer coat, He Sanlang had already walked up to her in a few big strides, his brows locked together. When matriarch noticed the expression her grandson was wearing, she immediately turned serious. Something big must have happened. "Sanlang, what happened to turn you into such a state?" He Changdi sat by matriarchy's side and gripped one of her hands in his. "Grandmother, the main kitchen in the inner court caught on fire. Eldest sister-in-law was injured. You have to send someone to request for an imperial physician, and we should ask for the best doctor there, head physician Lu." What? Matriarchy hadn't imagined that the matter would be so serious. She hurriedly called for senior servant Lu to retrieve the jade token, an item that signified her status as a ranked madam. With it, they would be able to send someone to the imperial hospital and ask for assistance. Matriarchy was so anxious that she wanted to get up. Her panic showed as she urged the maidservant by her side to bring her some clothes. "Quickly, help me dress. I want to see how eldest young madam is." Google Tag. Command push, function, Google Tag. Display, div GPT, add 1505873300429-0. At this moment, He Changdi had finally calmed down. "Grandmother, don't be too worried. When I passed by the kitchen, I already left someone in charge of the matter. It does no good even if you panic now. You might even hurt your body instead. Why don't you get up now? But wait here. Liwa will come and report in a bit." Matriarch had experienced many trials in her life before. She had only panicked due to her emotions going out of control. Upon hearing her grandson's reasoning, she slowly started to calm down as well. "Sanlang, you've done well this time. You're finally able to take more responsibility on your shoulders." He Changdi was thinking of the sequence of events in his past life and hadn't heard Matriarchy's words at all. By this time, Matriarchy had already put on some more layers of clothes and was sitting at the head of the parlor. He Changdi sat by his grandmother, his eyes darkening as he thought of how to approach this topic. Matriarchy rubbed the prayer beads in her hand. Her eyes kept darting to the entrance, waiting with poorly veiled impatience for someone to come and give them news. Suddenly, He Changdi spoke up. "Grandmother, I have something to request of you." Matriarch turned to look at her youngest grandson, a little curious. Her grandson had been born with good looks and had been raised in a noble family. Although he was smart, he lacked experience. But now it seemed like her grandson had grown up right after he had gotten married. He was a little more reserved, a bit more adult-like than before. When has my dear Sanlang started thinking about making requests of others? Hadn't it always been us pleading for you to do things in the past? Matriarchy spoke benevolently. Anyone who heard her would know how much she spoiled this grandson of hers. Otherwise, she wouldn't have specially entered the palace just to ask the Empress Dowager for a fertile Chu family bride for him. However, Sanlang had a severe expression on his face. Grandmother, if anything happens to sister-in-law, please don't let Chu Lian take her place in managing the household. Upon hearing Sanlang's request, Matriarchy was confused. She frowned, finding this very strange. What has happened to you, my dear child? Although your wife has just married into our He family, she seems to have a good temperament. If your eldest sister-in-law has suffered some injury, she's the only healthy madam in our He family. Although she's young, grandmother is still here to guide her. With my guidance, and if she's willing to work hard, then what's wrong with letting her manage the household? Sanlang could sense the protective stance his grandmother had over Chu Lian in her tone. Anger filled him in an instant, and he inwardly scolded Chu Lian for being so slick. She had just entered the He family, but she had already won the favor of all the senior members. However, he couldn't go along with his grandmother this time. Chapter 34, High Evaluation 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valère novels. Please read from the original source. Sanlang pursed his lips, held back the frustration in his heart, and said, Grandmother, it's not that I'm not willing to let Lianer manage the household. However, she's still young, and she's only just come of age. There were so many ladies in the Ingwer estate. How could they have taught every single one properly? She's lacking in many areas. Let her follow at your side and learn everything slowly. Once she's familiar with the household, it's not too late to ask her to shoulder bigger responsibilities. Once Matriarchy heard that was the original meaning behind his words, she stared at him in rebuke. So our Sanlang is someone who pampers his wife. Well, you're right. Your wife is still rather young. She should come and learn by grandmother's side. Don't worry, grandmother won't forget about your wife. Grandmother must have been born to toil. I still have to worry over these things even when I'm already this old. However, there was some sense in what Sanlang had said. Chu Lian had lost her mother at an early age, and as the saying went, with a new stepmother, fathers turn into stepfathers one. It was already a miracle that Chu Lian was this ignorant and meek, having grown up in those circumstances. They couldn't be too demanding on the rest. Back in the Ingwer estate, she probably hadn't been taught much. So, Matriarchy thought it was indeed sensible to have Chu Lian learn the necessary skills by shadowing her. Chu Lian seemed to be smart. The duty of managing a household would fall upon her sooner or later, and it was best to have her prepared when the time came. Sanlang had achieved his goal, so he inwardly heaved a sigh of relief and quickly refuted his grandmother's claim of being old. Actually, Matriarchy really couldn't be considered that old. She hadn't even reached 60 years of age. Although she had some minor ailments here and there, her body was in rather good condition thus far. For Sanlang, only one thing mattered. As long as the power of managing the household didn't fall into Chu Lian's hands, her little ploys were unlikely to succeed. Why hasn't anyone come back to report? Matriarchy was starting to get impatient from waiting. Changdi had been about to get up and find out what happened when he saw a few people walking in from the garden outside. The person leading them was actually Lady Zhou. Following behind Lady Zhou was one of her senior servants. Walking right at the very end was Liyue. Changdi and Matriarchy were floored by this sight. It was Matriarchy who reacted first. She leaned heavily on her cane as she stepped forward to welcome them. Her personal maidservant hurriedly supported the old matriarch. Eldest granddaughter-in-law, you're fine? Lady Zhou pinched the space between her brows and entered the parlor. She then supported Matriarchy from her other side and got her to sit back down on the soft couch. Grandmother, granddaughter-in-law is fine. Please don't worry too much. Upon hearing that Lady Zhou was fine, Matriarchy still carefully inspected her, sweeping a gaze up and down for any injuries. After confirming that she looked absolutely all right, Matriarchy was finally able to relax. Following that, she turned to look at Changdi with a strange expression. Sanlang, what's this? Your eldest sister-in-law is just fine. Why did you come here in a panic, asking for an imperial physician? You're just making trouble. Changdi was also stunned. Countless thoughts tumbled about in his head. What? How? In his previous life, eldest sister-in-law had clearly suffered serious burns. She had even lost a leg because they hadn't been able to get the imperial physician here in time. Chu Lian had also taken over the management of the He household because of this fire. She had then proceeded to steal from the household funds, funneling all that money into Xiao Wujing. Google Tag. Command Push, Function, Google Tag. Display, div GPT, add 1505873300429-0. However, eldest sister-in-law was now standing completely undamaged before him. Changdi's expression turned dark. He pressed his thin lips together, speechless. Luckily, Lady Zhou reacted quickly. Grandmother, please don't panic. Lady Zhou took the teacup from a maidservant's hand and passed it to Matriarch He before she slowly explained. Granddaughter-in-law came here to report that the main kitchen caught on fire. Granddaughter-in-law was about to enter the main kitchen to brew some medicine for mother at the time. If I hadn't bumped into third sister-in-law in the gardens outside and chatted for a short while with her, granddaughter-in-law might have really been injured. Third brother must have heard the servants along the way mention that I had gone to the main kitchen, so that's why he thought that granddaughter-in-law was injured. When she finished speaking, Lady Zhou turned to Changdi. Third brother, wasn't that what happened? Everything had been messed up. Changdi struggled to maintain his composure and nodded towards Matriarch He. Yes, grandmother. I thought that eldest sister-in-law was injured. Lady Zhou's reasoning made sense. Matriarch He nodded. How did the main kitchen catch on fire? Are there any casualties in our household? What's the situation like now? Lai Wei came up to report at this time. Reporting to Matriarch, we don't know the cause of the fire yet. As it happened around mealtime, quite a few senior and junior servants, as well as the cooks, have been gravely injured. I'm afraid Cook Zhou isn't likely to survive the night. Matriarch He froze for a moment before sighing with great pity. At the same time, she addressed Lai Wei with an order. Inform the main steward. Tell him that he needs to find the cause of this fire, as well as take care of the injured servants. As for Cook Zhou, if you have the time, arrange a visit with her. After all, we've enjoyed the sweets she's made for so many years. It would only be proper to say a few words. Lai Wei hurriedly went off to obey the orders. Lady Zhou patted the back of Matriarch He's hand in reassurance. Grandmother, please don't worry. What happened was just too sudden. There wasn't anything that could be done. We can only say that it was Cook Zhou's fate. Matriarch He held Lady Zhou's hand and patted her. Luckily, you made it out all right. If anything happened to you, how would grandmother answer to Dalong and your two little girls? Thank goodness for Sanlang's wife. That girl carries fortune with her. She might even be our He family's lucky star. She's so young, and you're her elder sister-in-law. Do take more care of her. Since she was talking to you in the garden, she must have seen the fire personally. She might still be in shock right now. Do visit her and take a look at her tomorrow when you're free. Lady Zhou warmly smiled. I understand. I heard that third sister-in-law likes brewing sancha. I have some good quality sancha with me, so I'll send some to her when I visit tomorrow. That's good. Matriarch He patted Lady Zhou's hand. Waves were churning in He Sanlang's heart as he listened to his grandmother and sister-in-law speaking. What was going on? How did that wicked woman get such a high evaluation in their hearts this time around? Chapter 35. Petty 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. When Matriarch He saw that her grandson was still in a daze, she urged him, return to your courtyard quickly. It's almost dark, and your wife suffered a shock. Reassure her a little. Lady Zhou urged him along in the same vein. Changdi absent-mindedly returned to his own courtyard, his thick and sharp eyebrows furrowed together, like a pair of wicked swords. Back at Qingxi Hall, Lady Zhou said in a helpless sort of tone, Grandmother, it's going to take a while to repair the main kitchen after this fire. Granddaughter-in-law will instruct each branch of the family to take care of their own meals in their own courtyards for the time being. Matriarch He nodded. That's all we can do for now. Anyway, They do have stoves in their own courtyards. When Erlang comes back, he'll just have to eat with me." Lady Zhou nodded in agreement. "Then granddaughter-in-law will go now to prepare." If each courtyard was to cook their own meals, she had to arrange for some servants to send them fresh ingredients every day. This just added on to the list of tasks she had to manage. "Go quickly. I'll go take a look at your mother and see how her health is like today." Thus, Lady Zhou supported Matriarch He, and they left Qingxi Hall together. Chu Lian was lying down on a wooden chair, reading a comedy that Fu Yin had found for her in the study. The book was written in traditional Chinese, and the story was old-fashioned, so Chu Lian found it tough to keep reading. The words before her eyes slowly turned into a lullaby, and in just one moment, she was fast asleep. The fair hands that were holding onto the book were resting on the armrest of the chair. Because the position was a little awkward, her white sleeves were rolled up, revealing her white and small forearms. Under the orange light of the room, that fair white skin looked like warm jade, giving people the urge to touch it. Senior servant Gue was waiting outside. After she didn't hear the sound of pages turning for a long time, she put down her embroidery work in her hands and took up a blanket from the side and was about to enter to put it on Chu Lian. However, she didn't expect to see He Changdi walking in with a stiff expression. He Sanlang cast a sideways glance at senior servant Gue and walked right into the bedchamber. He Changdi's cold look sent chills down senior servant Gue's spine. She was about to follow in to take a look, but she was worried that he would be angry, so she could only bear with her anxiety and wait outside. She kept listening for movement on the inside. The moment anything didn't seem right, she would walk right in and protect her third young madam. He Changdi walked into the bedchamber with his hands behind his back. He swept the surroundings with a cold gaze, and it was only then that he noticed the small lump on the chair by the window. The depths of his eyes were really dark. His cool, handsome face carried an icy aura. He looked exactly like a walking ice mountain. He was a completely different person from the nice, loyal husband that the novel had described. Google Tag. Command Push, Function, Google Tag. Display, div GPT, add 1505873300429-0. If anyone tried to describe He Sanlang as a handsome, gentle, and sweet husband, Chu Lian would have been the first one to leap up in protest. With a long stride, he made it to the chair in just a few steps. His cold gaze slowly shifted downwards and landed on Chu Lian. Waves rippled across the surface of the frozen lake in his eyes unconsciously the moment that he saw the scene before him. A burst of emotion that shouldn't have existed suddenly rose up and coiled around him. The young girl who had just come of age was petite and soft-looking. Her head was pillowed on one arm. After sleeping on the chair, her black hair had already come loose. A few strands were lying on her slender, rounded shoulders. Her eyelashes were long and dark, like two little fans casting shadows over her eyes, setting off a pretty picture. Her skin was practically flawless, smooth and white to match her petal plush lips. They moved in a pattern along with her shallow, long breaths. She looked exactly like a sleeping kitten, giving watchers the urge to pull her into their arms, pet her little head gently, and coo to her in a soft voice. Upon seeing such a defenseless Chu Lian, the showering scene that he had saw that day popped into He Changdi's mind. He had to admit that she was indeed beautiful. Because she was young, even if she didn't put one bit of makeup on, her face still looked like a beautiful painting. Perhaps this was one of the perks of being a main character. He Sanlang blanked out for a good 2 seconds. Then, his face contorted. He berated himself fiercely, scolding himself for fantasizing about that wicked woman. How could he be so silly as to think that she was good and harmless? He Changdi took a deep breath in, letting the cool night air wake him up. He reached out to push Chu Lian with force, saying in a cold voice, "Get up." Chu Lian was in the middle of a beautiful dream of eating a huge feast in the modern era. After getting pushed by He Sanlang, the book in her hands fell to the ground with a loud plop. She rubbed the sleep from her eyes as she woke up. Without looking properly at the person by her side, she asked, "Momo, is it time to eat?" "I'm hungry." He Changdi's face was reflecting his inner turmoil. Upon hearing Chu Lian's words, it immediately turned as black as a pot. "Eat, eat, eat." All she knew was how to eat all day. Had this wicked woman suddenly became a foodie in this lifetime? You're still thinking of food? The kitchen's already burned down. Don't think you'll get anything to eat tonight. Sanlang couldn't hold back his anger as he shouted at her. The moment Chu Lien heard his voice, any dregs of sleep were immediately shaken off by her fright. With a pair of watery, big eyes, Chu Lien glared up at the man standing tall beside her. Her almond-shaped eyes were moist because she had just woken up. There was a faint blush on her cheeks. She looked completely like a harmless, tender young woman. Even if someone listed off all the wicked deeds that she would come to do in the future, there would probably be a grand total of 0 who would believe them. Her eyebrows furrowed when she looked clearly at the frosty look on Sanlang's face. She looked listless as she turned her head and leaned back against the chair once again. Husband, how are the servants in the main kitchen now? Are there any who were hurt badly? Her voice was soft and pleasant to the ear, however. When Sanlang heard it, his temper rose for no reason. Don't you know perfectly well whether anyone was hurt or not? This wicked woman was probably the one who had ordered someone to set off the fire in the first place. Didn't she feel that she was being very fake by asking about it? Chu Lien found it weird. She puffed up her cheeks like a squirrel. Well, I wasn't the one who set the fire off. How would I know? Conversely, Changdi sneered in response. Her words had clearly angered him. He felt that he couldn't continue living with this wicked woman for a second longer. His chest was about to explode from the amount of rage bottled up inside. He really just wanted to strangle her to death right now. Chapter 36, Petty 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Chu Lien was already completely used to Sanlang's abnormal reactions by now. Although she could feel that he absolutely despised her, except for the sudden strangling on their wedding night, he didn't seem like a threat, even though he had always given her a cold shoulder. She wasn't the original Chu Lien, who was entirely too greedy. She also didn't care too much for Xiao Bojian. The current Chu Lien was someone who just wanted an easy life. Even though she didn't know why Sanlang didn't like her, as long as he didn't obstruct her days of comfort, she would leave him alone. Since she had mysteriously come to this great Wu dynasty and had become a young madam of a noble family, then she would happily live her layabout life in bliss. As for Changdi, she would leave him to his strange temper. What meaning would there be in getting angry at a little kid throwing a tantrum? As you wished, the main kitchen has been burned down, but I bet you didn't expect that eldest sister-in-law would be fine. I'm afraid your plans have been foiled. Oh, I forgot to mention, I'm afraid that Cook Zhou won't make it. Seems like you won't be able to eat the Jing'an household's signature sweets ever again. Sanlang said mockingly. Back at Qingxi Hall, he had thought that Lady Zhou had claimed that Chu Lien had saved her life in order to reassure grandmother. He would have never believed that the culprit behind the fire would save his sister-in-law unless he saw it with his own 2 eyes. Chu Lien shook her head slightly. She really didn't know what was going on in this guy's head. Geez, was he paranoid or what? She didn't even have the time to cook up some real good food. How would she have the time to plot and carry out a sinister scheme? Not to mention, this huge Jing'an estate had so many businesses under it. How could managing all of that be fun? She had no desire whatsoever to hold such a tiring post. Rather, she would leave that honor to sister-in-law. She had worked her pants off in her previous life. Now that she had gotten such a once-in-a-lifetime chance, she was just going to laze her days away. She didn't have to worry about hunting for a promotion or paying mortgage. Even if she did nothing but cook scrumptious food and admire the scenery all day, she would still get a salary here. The salary was pretty hefty as well. Where else was she going to find such a perfect job? Chu Lien didn't speak and rose from the chair, tidying up her slightly messy hair. Her head was slightly lowered, and she was in poor light. Her face was cast in shadows, so her expression wasn't clear. Sanlang thought that he had finally gotten one over her, and she was only hiding her frustration. Unfortunately for her, Sanlang saw right through it and felt invariably smug. He would be happy as long as this wicked woman's plans didn't come to fruition. Chu Lien, I advise you to quit scheming while you still can. This isn't the Jing'an household of before. Your foxtail is showing. You had better keep it tucked in, or else. He Changdi felt like he had gotten his point across, so he tossed his sleeves and walked away. Chu Lian stood up and watched him leave with her head tilted to one side. When she could no longer see his figure, she muttered to herself, that loony. Since when had she had a foxtail? When she only wanted to pass her days in peace, make good food, and raise her standard of living. That was it. But here he was, threatening her for no good reason. Google tag. Command push, function, Google tag. Display, div GPT, add 1505873300429-0. Was he even human? That was just a waste of his godly looks. How petty. He Changdi coldly walked out of the bedroom, scaring senior servant Gue, who was waiting by the door. She hurriedly greeted him, but he didn't even glance at her as he left for the study. He had just entered the corridor when he saw his servant, Lai Yue, leading 2 maidservants into the courtyard. He Sanlang stopped and asked, "Where are you going in such a hurry?" Upon hearing his master's tone, Lai Yue knew that he wasn't in a very good mood. He didn't dare to dally and rushed to explain. The matriarch sent these maidservants over with dinner. After saying so, Lai Yue moved aside, revealing the 2 maidservants, each holding an exquisitely decorated box of food. The mention of dinner made He Sanlang remember how Chu Lian's had immediately asked for food upon first waking up. His expression turned sour. "Send it all to my study," He Changdi coldly ordered. Lai Yue gaped before asking in a whisper, "Ah, young master, you're not going to eat in the parlor?" The study isn't a place for eating. After Lai Yue had finished speaking, he felt a sinisterly cold gaze land on his head. Thus, he hurriedly turned and instructed the maidservants behind him. "Didn't you hear, young master? Hurry up and go to the study." The 2 maidservants lowered their heads and exchanged looks. They couldn't understand what third young master was trying to do, but they were just servants, so all they could do was obey. The 2 of them trembled in trepidation as they sent the food over to the study. Lai Yue moved closer to He Changdi's side. "Young master, there are also some fresh ingredients here. Where should we put them?" Eldest young madam said that they would be a little busy tomorrow morning, and the food might be sent a bit later than usual. She sent each courtyard a package of ingredients just in case. Chapter 37. Not Letting You Eat, 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. He Sanlang couldn't be bothered to deal with the fresh ingredients. He waved at Lai Yue impatiently. Lai Yue had already been serving He Changdi for years, so he understood what He Changdi wanted. He turned and instructed the maidservants to send the ingredients to their courtyard's kitchen. Although the kitchen here wasn't used often, it was quite clean as the servants would still clean it every day. For a period of time, each courtyard would have to settle their own meals. As for the cookware, Lady Zhou sent some senior servants over with a set overnight. She even sent some firewood and charcoal with them. There were no large surfaces for dining in the study room. There was only a writing desk and a few side tables. The 2 maidservants who brought the food in were at a loss of what to do. They didn't know where to place the dishes. The moment He Changdi entered the study, he saw the 2 maidservants standing there carrying the boxes with troubled expressions on their faces. One of the servants drummed up the courage to say, "Third young master, we really can't hold dinner here. Why don't we place the dishes in the parlor?" He Sanlang's expression turned dark right after she finished speaking. He tossed a gloomy glance at her, and following that, he ordered her to scram. The 2 low-ranking maidservants were so frightened that they trembled, put down the food, and didn't dare to stay a second longer. They hurriedly ran out as if a deadly tiger was after them. Third young master usually looked handsome and heroic. Who knew that he would be so frightening once he got angry? The poor servant's ideal image of him was instantly crushed. Lai Yue came in from outside and saw that the maidservants had run off with pale faces. He scratched his head with a bemused look on his face. He shivered a little when he spotted He Sanlang's cold expression. Lai Yue cleared his throat and carefully asked, "Young master, when do you want to call young madam over to have dinner?" "It's getting late." He Changdi harumphed after hearing that. That wicked woman had already plotted and schemed against the entire estate today. Did she really think she would be getting dinner? Let her dream on. Go out and keep a watch. No one is allowed in without my permission, even third young madam. He Changdi instructed without an ounce of compassion. Laiwe hadn't expected third young master to say something like that. He instantly froze on the spot and didn't know how to react. His line of sight landed on the boxes sitting on the writing desk. He was about to say something, but shivered when he met with He Changdi's dispassionate gaze. His young master had never gone back on his words before and would never let him defy his orders. But was he really not going to let third young madam eat? This wasn't good. However, Laiwe went out and kept watch at the door. He didn't dare to say a single word to He Sanlang. He Changdi stood before the writing desk with a profound look in his eyes. He then retrieved a thick envelope from a hidden compartment inside the desk. He carefully read through the letter inside, and after making sure there weren't any problems, he sealed the envelope and wrote the words, to grandmother. Google tag. Command push, function, Google tag. Display, div GPT, add 1505873300429-0. Then, He Sanlang placed the envelope inside the hidden compartment once again. The wick of the study's candle crackled. He Changdi turned back to the red lacquered boxes, the scent of food catching his attention as it drifted up to his nose. He stood up and opened both of them. Each had 4 to 5 layers, and there were different dishes in each one. There was steamed perch and ginger and scallion, roast mutton chops, spring chicken, and vegetables in one of the boxes. Soup and rice were packed in the second box, and there was even a warm wine flask one. Every dish looked exquisite and much better than what the main kitchen usually served. They must have come from the little kitchen in Matriarchy's courtyard. Although they had been left out for a while, and the dishes were cold by now, they still looked appetizing and looked more delicious than what they had eaten last night. He Sanlang felt smug after looking at these dishes. Didn't that wicked woman love to eat? Well, she wasn't getting any. As he was savoring his revenge in his mind, He Changdi picked up some chopsticks and chose a few dishes to taste. However, the dishes might have gotten too cold, or perhaps he wasn't in a good mood. Although the 2 boxes were filled to the brim with delicious food, he barely tasted any of it. He ate a few bites before setting down his chopsticks. He sat down again and casually took out a book to read. TL note, here we go, more food. Steamed perch, roast mutton chops, braised spring chicken. Chapter 38. Not letting you eat, too. The sky had already turned dark. Chu Lian had already returned to the Ingwer estate today and had been surrounded by a group of women she didn't know. She didn't have much of an appetite and so hadn't eaten much today. By the time she had returned to the Jinggan estate, she was already starving. However, because of the fire, she had completely forgotten about her hunger. By now, her stomach was growling in protest. Chu Lian leaned against the couch, comedy book still in hand. She was bored while waiting for dinner time, so she had already showered and changed into her sleeping clothes. However, there was still no sign of dinner in sight. This wasn't right. Her sister-in-law, Lady Zhou, was the conscientious sort. The 2 of them hadn't eaten dinner yet, and eldest sister-in-law couldn't have possibly forgotten about them. Not to mention, there was still Matriarch He. On the day of the tea ceremony, Chu Lian had discovered that Matriarch He was really sweet on her youngest grandson. Chu Lian couldn't wait any longer. She shouted for Shi Yin, who was in the outer chamber. Shi Yin quickly walked in. Third young madam, do you have any orders? Go ask and see if dinner has been sent over. I'm hungry. After Shi Yin bobbed in acknowledgement, she went out to find out what happened to their meal. She returned as quickly as she left. While leaning against her red pillow as she read her comedy, Chu Lian casually asked, So, how did it go? Shi Yin had a conflicted expression on her face and didn't know what to say. After a moment, when she didn't hear any reply from her, Chu Lian cast her gaze over in curiosity. What happened? It was only then that Shi Yin reported how Laiwe had stolen their food delivery away. Shi Yin felt aggrieved inside. How could third young master keep making things difficult for third young madam? He wouldn't even let her have a proper meal. She was faring even worse than in the Ingwer estate. Chu Lian gaped in astonishment, her black eyes shining and full of disbelief. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. He Sanlang was way too childish. So he wasn't going to let her eat it all? Was he trying to starve her? Chu Lian rolled her eyes and didn't think much of it. She didn't notice the aggrievement and unhappiness in Xian's eyes. Xian, go to the study and ask third young master about it. Xian agreed and left with a gloomy face. Outside the study, Laiwa felt like banging his head against the wall. He was forced to face the red-eyed maidservant as she complained about the unfair treatment of her mistress. My dear Ancestor One, it isn't that I don't want to let you in, but I have my orders. After saying so, Laiwa pointed in the direction of Chu Lian's bedroom and lowered his voice. Young master said not to let anyone in, even if it's third young madam. Xian bit her lip as tears were about to fall from her eyes. What has third young madam done wrong, that third young master is treating her this way? Our madam is starving right now, and you don't seem to care at all. Laiwa felt a headache coming on. Miss Xian, I'm begging you, please don't make things difficult for me. I'm just a servant like you. How could I disobey my master's orders? My dear ancestor, he's trying to put Xian at a higher position to show that he's helpless. Right arrow curving left. Chapter 39. Providing for herself. 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Xian stomped her foot, feeling aggrieved. You're the same as young master. You think that our young madam is easy to bully because she is young and kind. After saying so, Xian ran off in anger. Laiwa watched the maidservant run away and felt completely helpless. Of course he knew that third young master was a little unreasonable, but he couldn't persuade him. Xian quickly returned to Chu Lian and related the story. Upon hearing it, Chu Lian was so surprised that she had to put her book down. She hadn't expected to be proven right. She was so speechless that she made Xian report everything once again. What? The outer court even sent ingredients over? When she heard this, Chu Lian's eyes lit up. Xian was still feeling sad for her mistress. She didn't expect Chu Lian to mention the fresh ingredients out of the blue like that. Her stare turned blank for a moment before she nodded and said, That's right. I heard that eldest young madam was afraid that breakfast would be delayed in the morning, so she sent out fresh ingredients to each courtyard. They arrived alongside dinner. Hey, if there were ingredients, then everything would be fine. It was hard enough for her to sit through one meal at the Jing'an estate. Since Sanlang wanted to take it all for himself, then he could have it all. She wasn't going to miss it one bit. Chu Lian scrambled off the couch and tossed her book aside. She was going to the courtyard's kitchen right now. Xian couldn't keep complaining about her mistress' unfair treatment if she was going to do that. She rushed to stop Chu Lian from going out. Third young madam, you can't wear that outside. Chu Lian took one look at the thin, cool sleeping clothes she was wearing and immediately realized how inappropriate it was. Then go and quickly find me some normal clothes to wear. Mingyan heard her from outside and came in to help. With their assistance, Chu Lian quickly changed into a light yellow dress. Her hair still wasn't dry, so she simply pinned it up with a white jade hairpin. She was dressed so simply that she resembled a magnolia, gentle and refined as it rested on its outstretched perch. One flowers of magnolias close-up in the spring garden. /caption. However, the image was easily broken as she grew impatient to appease her growling stomach. When Xian saw that she was in such a hurry, she didn't bother adding on any other accessories and simply said, You're ready? Chu Lian immediately rose and rushed out of the bedroom like a hurricane. Xian and Mingyan chased after her from behind, shouting, Third young madam, please go a little slower. Xian couldn't help but watch her with sad, sorry eyes. Third young madam must be starving. When senior servant Gue saw that Chu Lian had left, she didn't know what was going on but followed anyway. Chu Lian had explored the entire courtyard yesterday, so of course she remembered where the kitchen was. In just a moment, she had already reached it. Google tag. Command push, function, Google tag. Display, div GPT, add 1505873300429-0. A woman in her 30s was looking after the kitchen when saw that third young madam had arrived. She quickly welcomed her in. Afraid that the kitchen was too dark, the woman immediately lit up a few more candles for her. Full of respect, the woman said, Third young madam, what have you come to the kitchen for? Chu Lian scanned her surroundings. Where are the ingredients that were sent here earlier? The woman stared at her. She hadn't expected third young madam to ask that, of all things. However, she instantly recovered her wits and led Chu Lian over to the chopping board. Then she honestly replied, "Third young madam, they are all here." Xian and the rest had also entered the kitchen by this time. The moment they entered, they spotted their mistress squatting by two large water vats, staring into them. Xian hurriedly went over. She had seen a goose tied up by the vats. Geese would be geese. Naturally, they would peck at people. Xian quickly pulled Chu Lian away, afraid for her mistress' well-being. However, Chu Lian didn't notice the geese at all. She was looking at the chopping board full of ingredients, and then to the ones by the water vats, and then to the ones in the water tanks. The sight of them made her extremely excited. Wow, terrific! There were vegetables, eggs, and more. There was even a variety of fishes. In the water tank alone, there were 2 catfish and a few snakeheads. There was also chicken and pork that had been prepared and ready to be cooked. There were even 2 pieces of venison. However, she hadn't eaten venison back in the modern age, so of course she didn't know how to cook it. She was just going to leave it be for now. It was getting late, and although she was craving for something like boiled fish with pickled cabbage and chili, it was troublesome to cook, as it would take some time to prepare. After Chu Lian took stock of all the ingredients, a plan formed in her mind. TL note, the fish in the water tank. If you're curious, catfish, snakehead. Chapter 40. Providing for herself, 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. While standing beside her, Xian saw that third young madam was reaching out to cook herself, and quickly reached out to stop Chu Lian. "Third young madam, how could you do it yourself? What do you want to eat? Tell this servant, and this servant will cook it for you." Xian couldn't help but get emotional as she said this. Although their 6th miss had not been favored while in the Ingwa estate, she was still a noble lady who had been raised and nurtured as one since she was young. She hadn't done any menial duties like cooking before. However, now she had to actually cook a meal for herself, just so she could fill her stomach. Although eldest young madam had ordered someone to send ingredients over, she hadn't actually sent a cook over. Whatever Chu Lian wanted to eat right now, she would have to cook it herself. Chu Lian saw that Xian was insistent on holding her back and understood that her current status meant that it wasn't appropriate for her to do such chores. She didn't care if she had to cook her meal herself, but she wouldn't know what rumors would spread if this matter got out of the courtyard. And so, she let Xian do the work as she micromanaged from the side. Xian couldn't handle it by herself, and Ming Yin went over to help. Chu Lian came to watch them from the side of the stove. She saw that all the common seasonings were there. However, they lacked vegetable oil, chili, and various other sauces. However, it was enough to cook what Chu Lian wanted to eat. When she saw that Xian was about to simply throw the cut-up Chinese cabbage into the water, Chu Lian hurriedly stopped her. Xian found it strange. "Third young madam, if we don't cook the Chinese cabbage like this, how else should we do it? In both the Ingwa and Jing'an estate, they prepared it exactly like this." Chu Lian didn't know what to say. She had finally understood that most of the dishes in the Great Wu dynasty were either boiled or roasted, if not steamed. Other than these 3 methods of cooking, there were no others. There weren't even any of the more complex seasonings that would have enhanced the flavor of the food. The sweet and sour fried Chinese cabbage required vegetable oil, but here, they didn't even have the habit of saving up lard, let alone vegetable oil. Chu Lian pointed at a slab of pork belly on the chopping board. "Ming Yin, cut a chunk about half the size of your palm and slice them into strips as thin as chopsticks. These strips would be used to make oil." Senior servant Gua saw that third young madam seemed to be giving out a secret recipe again, and so she quickly ushered the woman watching the kitchen out. Chu Lian was already used to their actions. She stood to one side and watched over Ming Yin slice the meat, pretending that she didn't notice anything. Her intentions was to just cook some simple dishes, and other than cooking the meat, which required some effort, it would only take an hour inclusive of the time needed to cook the rice. They wouldn't let Chu Lian do anything herself. Although Xian was not a stranger to cooking, she didn't cook often. Adding on the difficulty of cooking the braised pork until the meat turned brown, the braised pork didn't turn out well as the color wasn't ideal. Although the braised pork looked quite average, it turned out tasting decent. Since Xiyin could produce something of this quality on her first try, she seemed to possess some talent in cooking. Google Tag. Command push, function, Google Tag. Display, div GPT, add 1505873300429-0. As they brought the dishes out of the kitchen, the surprise on Xiyin and senior servant Gui's faces took a while to fade. They didn't know that food could be cooked this way. Other than boiling, roasting, and steaming, you could actually pan-fry them in such a way. To think that it could turn out so delicious-looking. Chu Lian was long past caring about their reactions. Her stomach was rumbling. Hurry, I'm hungry. Bring it to the parlor and set up the dishes. Yes, madam. The servants behind her replied. The kitchen wasn't far from the study. On this summer night, there was a cool eastward wind blowing. The kitchen just happened to be upwind of the study. Lai Yue had noticed the movements from the kitchen early on. He had even tiptoed and looked in the direction curiously. Who knew that an extremely enticing aroma would waft along with the breeze after a short moment? TL note, hold on to your appetites, guys. This is one of my favorite dishes, Drool's braised pork belly. I hope you enjoyed the extra chapters for this weekend. I'm completely bowled over by your warm welcome for TMR. We'll be back to the usual schedule of one chapter a day starting tomorrow. I usually post chapters around 9 a.m. GMT plus 8, which is 9 p.m. EST. TMR also has a discussion channel on Volari's Discord server. Come chat with me. 3. Chapter 41. Just Starved to Death, 1. This chapter has been stolen from Volare novels. Please read from the original source. That was a fragrance he had never smelled before. He couldn't tell what the smell was made of, but it was mesmerizing. Lai Yue had not eaten his dinner yet, and was planning to bear with his hunger until his master went to sleep. Then, he would grab some dried foods to tide him over. However, a mesmerizing aroma just had to come wafting in with impeccable timing. All it took was 1 second, and his stomach had already began to grumble. The kitchen was upwind and it was breezy tonight. The aroma drifted over continuously, and he had nowhere to hide from it. Smelling something so delicious on an empty stomach was practically the worst punishment he could think of for someone. Lai Yue saw that there were people moving around in the kitchen through the window. His eyes stared straight in their direction. He hated that his eyes couldn't simply stretch over and sneak through the window to see what third young madam was instructing her servants to do. Changdi was reading a book in the study. Since it was early summer, it was a little hot at night, so he left the windows in the study half opened. He had been immersed in reading his book. However, at some point in time, a particular fragrance had come drifting in through the window. It was strangely enticing. Although Sanlang had tried most of the delicacies in the Great Wu dynasty, he couldn't tell what kind of delicacy this scent was coming from. Only faint wisps of it had drifted into the study. However, it was the elusiveness of this scent that made it even more enticing. Changdi took a deep breath and turned to look at the 2 boxes of food left on the desk. He was wondering if he should eat a little more, but upon thinking of how they looked, he lost all his appetite. Forget it. He would bear with it for a little longer. Sanlang turned his attention back to the book and forced himself to concentrate. On the other side, Chu Lian was leading her maidservants, who were carrying the food, to the parlor. They happened to pass by the study on their way there. Lai Yue stared unblinkingly at the box in Xian's hands, almost drooling from the smell. Xian still remembered how Lai Yue had treated her when she had come to ask about dinner, so she rolled her eyes at him and kept her chin high as she walked past him. As Lai Yue watched third young madam and the maidservants pass by, he could smell something delicious. It hooked his appetite and made him even hungrier. However, this wasn't a good time to ask for food from third young madam. He still had to guard the study door for third young master. Chu Lian instructed the maidservants to place the dishes on the table in the parlor. The dishes consisted of a fragrant, cubed braised pork belly meat, kung pao chicken, sweet and sour bok choy, and a simple egg drop soup. Xian gave Chu Lian a bowl of rice. Google Tag. Command push, function, Google Tag. Display, div GPT, ADDI 1505873300429-0. Once all the dishes were placed down, The entire parlor was filled with the scent of delicious food. Senior servant Gue and the personal maidservants had not eaten yet either. Chu Lian sat at the head of the table. When she saw that the maidservants were eyeing the plates and frantically gulping down their drool, she smiled. "Since you're all hungry, sit down and eat with me." The moment she finished speaking, senior servant Gue stopped her by saying, "Third young madam, we are in the Jing'an household right now. You're the newly wedded bride. You must conduct yourself in a manner befitting of your new station. As our master, how could you let us servants eat together with you? If this were to get out, what would others say?" Chu Lian felt helpless, but she understood that senior servant Gue was right. She also saw that even though senior servant Gue was eyeing the food just like the rest, she didn't make a single move for it. "All right, then I'll eat first. I've made extra for every dish. When I'm done, why don't you stay here in the parlor to eat?" Senior servant Gue nodded and didn't stop her this time. Actually, she felt hungry just looking at these new, never-before-seen dishes. Back in the kitchen, when the braised meat had just finished cooking, third young madam had let each of them have a taste. It had been so delicious that it could be compared to that roasted venison from before. No, it might even be more delicious. At first she had thought that something made with this plain pork would surely be oily and unappetizing. She hadn't expected it to be so tasty. However, when she had one piece, she immediately wanted to have another. She couldn't stop at all. Senior servant Gue was one of the older servants of the Ingwa household, and she had even served at the side of Chu Lian's biological mother. She had a lot of worldly experience and a lot of self-restraint. However, even she couldn't hold back her appetite. TL note, Chu Lian's going to kill me with hunger. Is the chapter title Just Starve to Death talking about He Sanlang or the readers? TVT braised pork belly, cubed kung pao chicken bok choy stir fry with oyster sauce egg drop soup. Chapter 42. Just Starve to Death, 2. Chu Lian held her bowl of rice in one hand as she ate the dishes before her. Although these few dishes couldn't be compared to those of the modern world because of their lack of seasonings, she felt happy enough that she could eat dishes like these in the Great Wu Dynasty. After arriving here mysteriously, this was the first meal that she had eaten so happily. But she was already used to eating dishes like these in the past, so Chu Lian wasn't too affected by it, even though it had been a while. After eating her usual one bowl of rice, she was already 80% full. As Chu Lian was eating, senior servant Gue hesitated for a moment before eventually speaking up. "Third young madam, why don't we call third young master here to eat together with you?" Chu Lian looked up in confusion with big, innocent-looking eyes, as if she didn't understand what senior servant Gue was saying. Perplexed, she said, "Hasn't he already eaten in the study? He even had 2 full boxes of food. There's a limit to what a single person can eat. Let's not force him to eat more. Not to mention, it's not good to eat too much at night." She spoke as if she was doing it out of consideration for He Sanlang. Chu Lian pouted and thought to herself, "I don't give a damn for your food. Since you're not letting me eat, don't think of eating any of mine either." She used a ladle to scoop out a small bowl of egg drop soup. After drinking all of it, Chu Lian was completely full. There was still plenty left on the table, which worked out fairly well. She had originally thought of letting the maidservants eat, as Chu Lian could only eat so much on her own, and she had a small appetite anyway. The sweet and sour bok choy was hardly touched at all. Chu Lian was afraid that senior servant Gue would feel uncomfortable eating with her around, so she retreated into her bedroom after eating. The maidservants were much more relaxed when Chu Lian wasn't around, as expected. They exchanged glances and giggled before they each took a bowl of rice and sat down to eat. Of course, senior servant Gue sat down as well. The moment Fuyan and Jingyan took their first bite, their eyes lit up and the speed of their chopsticks increased. Jingyan had her mouth full of food as she talked, completely lacking the dignity of a noble household's personal maidservant. "Sister Xian, did you make this? It's unbelievably fragrant and tasty. I've never eaten such tasty meat before." The corners of Zion's lips curled up. "Actually, I wasn't the one who came up with it. It was third young madam who taught me how." Senior servant Gue nodded. "All of you, do serve third young madam to the best of your ability. Who knows if you might make her happy at some point. and shall teach you a few secret recipes in return. You won't have to worry about your livelihood or that of your future descendants." Fuyan's eyes glimmered calculatively. Although there was plenty for every single dish, senior servant Gue and the 4 maidservants tried to finish everything. They felt like they were about to burst. The 5 of them held onto their stomachs in pain, but none of them regretted it. Ming Yin stood up and rubbed her swollen stomach in an exaggerated manner, causing Fu Yin and Shi Yin to smile. "Look at you eat. Be careful of overeating." Senior servant Gue purposely tried to frighten Ming Yin with a stern face. However, Ming Yin wasn't fooled. "Momo, it was just too delicious. Once I started, I couldn't stop." Senior servant Gue looked at the plates on the table. There were only a few pieces of meat and some soup left. She turned to Shi Yin and said, "Shi Yin, bring the leftovers to the kitchen. We can have these with some rice tomorrow." The dishes that were made with third young madam's secret recipes were simply too delicious. Senior servant Gue found it a waste to throw away even the tiniest scraps of the meal. Chapter 43. Just Starved to Death, 3. Xian happily took the leftovers to the kitchen. When she passed by the entrance of the study, she spotted Lai Yue staring at her with bright eyes. "Sister Xian, do you still have any more food?" Xian furrowed her brows and hid the boxes of food behind her. She raised her chin as she said guardedly, "What are you asking that for? Don't tell me that you're not getting fed while serving third young master." He got 2 whole boxes of food. Since she had been snubbed by Lai Yue before, she couldn't help sounding a little mocking as she talked. "That had nothing to do with me." Lai Yue pointed towards the study behind him. "It was all third young master's orders. I haven't eaten anything since afternoon. I'm so hungry that my front is probably stuck to my back right now." When he finished speaking, Lei Yu's stomach grumbled. Xian gave him a good look, as if trying to tell if he was lying. "Miss Xian, we're all servants. You can't possibly not know. No servant eats together with their master." Lai Yue was good at talking, and he managed to find Xian's weak spot. "Are you sure you really didn't eat?" "I really haven't eaten. See, my stomach's even growling." "You heard that, right?" Xian pursed her lips and placed the boxes of food down on a stone table nearby. She took out some leftover rice and dishes from inside. "There's not much left anyway. There's only a few pieces of braised meat, soup, and a bowl of rice. Just take it to hold off your hunger for now." Lai Yue swallowed visibly. "It's good enough as long as it's edible. I'm not too picky." Xian glared at him and poured the soup and pieces of meat onto the bowl of rice. It looked exactly like the modern meal, braised meat with rice. She pushed the bowl to Lai Yue. "Here, take it. Remember to give the bowl and chopsticks to the old servant in the kitchen to wash when you're done." Lai Yue nodded furiously. Xian felt annoyed by his happy expression, so she took the boxes of food and quickly walked away. Those who have eaten braised meat would know that the gravy alone was delicious when poured over white rice. Lei Yu's nose twitched as he realized that the fragrance he had smelled before had come from this dish. What had Xian called it just now? That's right, braised meat. Lai Yue was really hungry by now. He squatted right at the entrance of the study with the bowl of food and gulped down the rice like a peasant farmer, with completely no dignity to speak of. Even so, he had never eaten such a comfortable meal before. For some reason, he just found this dish unbelievably tasty. He picked up a piece of braised meat with his chopsticks and watched it wobble before he stuffed it into his mouth. That amazing flavor spread on his taste buds. It was 100 times tastier than venison. Unfortunately, there was just too little braised meat left over. He finished it all in a few bites. It wasn't enough for him at all. Those darn maidservants were too greedy. They ate so much and left so little for him. Lai Yue kept thinking about the food. If there was a whole plate of braised meat in front of him right now, he would definitely be able to finish it all by himself. Furthermore, it would definitely be sparkling clean once he was done. After having another 2 mouthfuls of rice soaked in the gravy from the braised meat, Lei Yu's eyes closed in bliss as he savored the taste of the rice in his mouth before swallowing. He finished half of the large bowl of gravy-covered rice very quickly. Meanwhile, the hard-working He Sanlang in the study was being tortured by the faint fragrance of the braised meat. In the end, He couldn't bear with it any longer. He threw down the book in his hands and walked out of the study. The moment he opened the door, he saw his personal manservant squatting at the entrance like a beggar, wolfing down a bowl of rice. Most importantly, the fragrance emanating from the bowl in his hands was the one that was torturing him in the study. Changdi narrowed his eyes and stared at Liyue with the corners of his lips curled up. Chapter 44. Just starved to death. 4. Liyue was in the middle of eating happily. He suddenly felt a chill on his back. When he turned around and saw Changdi, he looked up and abruptly started. He hadn't expected his master to come out at this time. He hurriedly tried to swallow the food in his mouth, but almost choked due to his urgency. Liyue quickly stood up and hid the bowl behind him before bowing in greeting to Changdi. Young master. Heh, I asked you to guard the door, but you're enjoying yourself eating out here. Tell me, what kind of food has made you forget all your etiquette? Liyue knew that there was no use in concealing it at this point. He cast his gaze downwards and scratched his head. Young master, it's from the meal that third young madam cooked. These are just some leftovers. They took pity on me and gave it to me after seeing me guarding the door here. Chulian. Rage built up in Sanlang's heart. He hadn't thought that wicked woman would actually make her maidservants cook after he took the boxes of food away. What made him even angrier was that her servants seemed to have cooked something even better than his meal. Changdi reached out his hand with a cold expression. Liyue looked at his master in a daze, stammering out, Young master, what do you want? Hand it over. Sanlang's tone was icy cold. You could almost see the icicles forming in the air. Liyue didn't dare to disobey his order, so he could only hand over the half-eaten bowl of rice to Changdi with a sad expression. Changdi took the bowl and used the light of the corridor to look at it. Although it did smell tantalizing, it had been completely messed up by Liyue. Changdi harumphed in disdain and gave his judgment, vulgar. Liyue lowered his head and didn't dare to speak. However, he was hoping for young master to return the bowl to him in his heart. He wasn't done eating. Sanlang shoved the bowl back into Leiyu's hands after looking at it. He turned and entered the study again. He murmured to himself, I was wondering what delicacies that wicked woman could have made. So it was just something like that. Although Changdi said so, he smacked his lips unconsciously and gulped. Liyue quickly finished the remainder of the food in the bowl after taking it back, afraid that third young master would come out and demand it back at any moment. When the entire bowl of gravy-covered rice had entered Leiyu's stomach, he couldn't help but rub his tummy, feeling extremely satisfied. Chulian was leaning against the headboard of her bed, holding onto the comedy book while thinking of what to eat the next morning. She had glanced over the ingredients in the kitchen just now and had actually found some flour. Making steamed pork or shrimp dumplings would be too troublesome, and senior servant Gue surely wouldn't let her do it herself. If it was too complicated, Xian and the rest wouldn't be able to learn the recipe either. After some thought, she decided that wontons were the easiest to make. They just had to roll the skin flat, wrap some vegetable stuffing in the skin, and boil it in a pot. After she finished deciding, Chulian tossed away the book in her hands and went asleep happily. Sanlang slept in the study tonight. The next day, when Sanlang woke up, he called Liyue in to serve him. However, he found that Liyue seemed a little rushed while helping him into his clothes, as if he was going to hurry somewhere. Changdi watched Liyue for a moment before asking in a low voice, Liyue, what are you hurrying for? Leiyu's hands trembled, and he quickly kneeled down to apologize. Sanlang sat by the bed and adjusted his collar. Tell me the reason, or I'll give you a punishment. Decide for yourself. Liyue grimaced and scolded himself for being so greedy in his heart. However, third young master was clearly angry by now. How could he possibly dare to hide it? Replying young master, third young madam is instructing the maidservants to prepare breakfast in the kitchen. Chapter 45. Wontons 1. Changdi was momentarily stunned. He hadn't imagined that would be the reason for Leiyu's urgency. He pursed his lips and was about to admonish Liyue angrily, But then he suddenly remembered that faintly tantalizing aroma he had smelled in the study last night. Actually, Changdi could imagine how tasty that dish must have been from the way Liyue had been wolfing his food down. Liyue was his personal servant and had been serving by his side since he was young. He had eaten plenty of delicacies in his life. If a picky eater like him liked something, it was probably really good. However, since Chu Lian had made the dish, his brain refused to acknowledge that fact. Sanlang coldly snorted, got up, and refused to pay any attention to Liyue. He originally intended to head to the outer court, but when he caught sight of the busy kitchen out of the corner of his eyes, Changdi abruptly changed his path and headed to the parlor. Senior servant Gue, who was in the middle of tidying up the parlor, suffered a shock and rushed to greet Changdi. "Good morning, third young master." Changdi's gaze swept across the room before he asked in a no-nonsense manner, "Where's your mistress?" Senior servant Gue looked down, but secretly glanced at him before replying in a soft voice, "Third young madam is in the kitchen." Preposterous. The house of Jingon isn't so poor as to have their third young madam cook her own meals. If this were to get out, what would other people think of us? Senior servant Gui's head dipped even lower upon hearing Sanlang's rebuttal. She was rendered completely speechless. Changdi harumphed. He sat down at the table and refused to leave. He was merely taking out his frustrations from yesterday night on senior servant Gue, since she was Chu Lian's most trusted steward. Senior servant Gue gave a pointed look to a young maidservant standing nearby, signaling her to pour some tea while she observed Sanlang from the side. She found it strange that third young master was still calmly sitting here in the parlor. He was clearly unhappy with third young madam, so to avoid her, he should have already gone to the outer court, rather than sit here like he was waiting for something. Changdi, left with nothing to do, looked around the room as he waited. Chu Lian's dowry was placed in boxes all around the parlor. The more he looked at them, the more he thought they were an eyesore. He would have left long ago had it not been for last night's dishes arousing his curiosity. Meanwhile, Chu Lian had figured wontons were pretty easy to make, so she brought Xian and Mingyan to the kitchen early in the morning to try. After mincing the meat, they added eggs, spring onions, and garlic. Then, they rolled out the dough and wrapped up the stuffing. By the time the wontons were ready to be cooked, an hour had already passed. Although Chu Lian didn't personally do anything, she had recited instructions to Xian and Mingyan from the side. It was already early summer by now, and the kitchen was hot, so she was already sweating by the time they were done. She had worn a light, thin pink dress today. The skirt was made of several layers of fabric and was extremely pretty. After she had finished dressing this morning, senior servant Gue had even complimented her, saying how well it suited her and how she looked like a tender, blooming peony. However, now that she had started sweating, the thin, translucent fabric clung to her body, revealing the silhouette of her light pink undergarments. The thin straps on her shoulders were completely exposed. It was only when Chu Lian stood up that she realized the awkward state of her clothing. Chapter 46. Wontons 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valère novels. Please read from the original source. Chu Lian instructed Xian and Mingyan to bring the wontons to the parlor. She had even specially taught Xian how to fry up some delicious scallion pancakes as a side dish to go with them. However, there was no vegetable oil, so they used the lard from the pork instead. Unfortunately, that meant it might taste a little greasy later. Senior servant Gue had told them that third young madam's recipes were all to be kept a secret and ordered them to keep out any curious passers-by. While Chu Lian was cooking with the maidservants, the kitchen door was always closed. When they finally opened the doors and let a refreshing morning breeze blow in, the sweaty Chu Lian felt much better. Chu Lian wanted to return to her room quickly to change, so she couldn't help but increase her pace. However, when she reached the parlor, she spotted Sanlang sitting there. Sanlang raised his head the moment he heard footsteps. When he saw Chu Lian's state of dress, he blushed. Then, his expression turned ugly. Chu Lian froze for a moment before she strolled right up to Changdi, a round fan in her hands. She blinked her big, beautiful eyes before asking, "Husband, why are you up so early?" Changdi saw that her slender shoulders were practically exposed and, upon abruptly remembering that Liyue was also in the room, he quickly stood up and pulled Chu Lian by her thin wrists towards the bedroom. Upon receiving such rough manhandling, Chu Lian was so shocked that her eyes were wide open. She didn't even have the time to react. When they entered the bedroom, Changdi carelessly threw Chu Lian's hands to the side. Then, in an equally frigid manner, he said, "Change your clothes." Chu Lian furrowed her brows and rubbed her reddened wrists. At his pointed remark, she looked down at her clothes. The fabric had turned sheer from her sweat. However, to someone like Chu Lian who regularly wore bikinis to the beach, this didn't seem immodest at all. Chu Lian inwardly rolled her eyes before looking back at Changdi. Didn't this guy dislike her? What did it matter to him how she dressed? Furthermore, what was going on with him? Didn't he want her to change? Then why was he still here staring at her? Although she had a slender figure, she usually wore loose clothing that masked it. Now this translucent pink dress was doing exactly the opposite and exposing her curves. Changdi was a little stunned. Chu Lian frowned and used the round fan in her hands to hide her chest. She glared at him. Then, she headed over to her closet and casually took another dress out. When she turned around, Changdi was still standing by the folding screen with his hands behind his back. She pouted and said unhappily, "I'm going to change. Get out." It was only then that Changdi realized that he had been staring at her the entire time. Frustrated with himself, he turned around and left without another word. As Chu Lian was changing, she complained, He left pretty quickly. If he was a real gentleman, he should have left much earlier." Google tag. Command push, function, Google tag. Display, div GPT, add 1505873300429-0. Changdi returned to the parlor, where Xian and Mingyan had already placed the freshly made breakfast on the table. Although there was an enticing aroma filling the room, Sanling didn't look at the food and instead gave Liyue a pointed look, ordering him out. When Liyue left, Sanling finally sat down. He was staring so intently at the food that Mingyan automatically scooped a serving of wontons for him. She poured some vinegar onto it before passing over an exquisite little spoon as well. Changdi hesitated, but he still took it. Then, he stared at her. There was so much pressure in Sanling's gaze that Mingyan trembled and couldn't speak. "Third young master, these are the wontons that third young madam taught this servant to make. Next to it are some scallion pancakes. Third young madam said that you have to eat the wontons with vinegar and finely chopped spring onions. Third young master, why don't you try it first?" Changdi appeared completely unmoved by Mingyan. His cold exterior didn't betray the depth of the astonishment he felt inside. TL note, some readers were wondering why Changdi is sometimes referred to as Sanlang, and I realize some people might have missed the extra footnotes, which look like floating numbers. Excerpt from Chapter 1, you can click on them, and that will bring you to the explanations at the bottom of chapters, below the next chapter button. Footnote from Chapter 1, clicking on that blue arrow will bring you back to the floating number. 3. I hope this answers your questions and shows you a cool new feature to look out for. You can also browse through the previous chapters and check out any extra notes you missed. I spend a lot of time researching and writing notes for the foreign terms or culture that I think require more explanation, so I'd be happy if you could take a look at them and understand more of the cultural nuances in the story. Love. Thanks for reading that long note, W. Now back to our food porn. Scallion pancakes are delish. 3 wontons in soup. Scallion pancakes with sauce. Chapter 47. Bloated from eating. 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Although the breakfast in front of him looked simple, an enticing aroma was drifting up from it. A memory from last night came unbidden to Sanlang's mind. Liyue squatting outside his study, wolfing down a certain bowl of food as if it was the last on earth. Sure, it smelled great, but was it really that tasty? Despite his doubts, Changdi couldn't help but to take up a spoon and stir the contents of the exquisite porcelain bowl before him. The ingot-shaped wontons bobbed in the soup as he stirred, and the scattered pieces of emerald green spring onions drifted near the top of the bowl like aquatic plants in a clear pool. The strong aroma filtered into his nose. Saliva began to gather in his mouth. It was becoming harder and harder to hold back his appetite. Changdi stared into the bowl like he was under some magic spell, spoon all but forgotten. His pupils began to darken as he was lost to his thoughts. Senior servant Gue, Ming Yin, and the rest of the servants waiting on him couldn't help but gulp at the tense atmosphere. However, in the end, Changdi still scooped up a wonton into his spoon and blew on it to cool it down before he moved it to his mouth. His handsome face was tilted downwards by just the slightest amount as he bit into that plump, white wonton. The flavor and soup inside overwhelmed his taste buds and caused him to freeze for a moment. Then, the corners of his lips raised. Sanling's gaze contained a swirling mixture of emotions. As his dark lashes cast a shadow over his eyes, no one noticed the glint of doubt that flitted through his gaze. After eating 2 wontons, he pointed towards the scallion pancakes sitting off to the side. His dining etiquette was impeccable, and his motions graceful. Senior servant Gue and the other maidservants couldn't tell what he was thinking at all from his blank expression. Upon seeing him point at the scallion pancakes, Ming Yin could only gather up the courage to serve him. She cut up the golden brown pancake, put the pieces into a smaller dish, before placing it by his side. Changdi didn't speak and merely picked up a piece of pancake with his chopsticks. He brought it up to his nose and sniffed it first, as if one whiff could tell him if the flavor would be to his taste. His sharp eyebrows furrowed a little, and then he placed the pancake into his mouth. This scallion pancake tasted very different from the hard flour pancakes and other similar dishes he had eaten in the past. It was thin, and the outer layer was slightly crispy while the inside was soft and savory. Once you took a bite, you just had to have another. Sanlang was inwardly very satisfied, but he didn't show it on his face at all. He simply pointed at the pancakes again. Ming Yin slightly gaped, but she didn't dare to say a single word. She moved to prepare another pancake, once again serving the small pieces to him in a separate dish. Thus, the handsome and unapproachable Sanlang sat at the table with an unreadable expression, having the best breakfast of his life. If not for the speed of his chopsticks and the movement of his mouth, as well as the rate at which the wontons and scallion pancakes were disappearing, no one would have suspected that this simple breakfast was, in fact, exactly to his taste. Meanwhile, Chu Lian had changed into a light blue dress and tidied up her slightly messy hair. She used a wet handkerchief to wipe the sweat from her face and neck before sitting down by the bed and fanning herself, finally feeling a little more refreshed. Google Tag. Command Push, Function, Google Tag. Display, div GPT, add 1505873300429-0. This wasn't even the hottest time of the year, and it was already this tough to bear with the heat. Chu Lian sighed and thought about asking senior servant Gue if they could place some ice in the bedroom to cool it off after breakfast. When Chu Lian finally rose and moved to the parlor again, the first thing she saw was the back of Sanlang as he sat ramrod straight at the table. Chu Lian frowned. She hadn't noticed it before, but now she realized that Changdi was also wearing a light blue robe today. With both of them dressed in the same color, it looked like they had done it on purpose to look like a couple. Chu Lian didn't fixate on the thought for long. As she waved away the curtsies from senior servant Gue and the other maidservants in the hall, she suddenly met with senior servant Gue's conflicted expression. Chu Lian tilted her head in confusion. However, senior servant Gue pursed her lips and didn't say anything. Seeing this, Chu Lian didn't think any more of it. She picked up her skirts and moved towards the table. As she was approaching Sanlang's back, she heard the sound of a spoon clinking against porcelain and quickly came to the realization that he was eating her breakfast. She puffed up her cheeks and glared at his back. Chu Lian suddenly had the urge to taunt him. "Husband, are you?" She began speaking while walking closer. However, when she finally reached the table, she was at a complete loss for words. This Sanlang was actually a greedy bastard. Although his posture was elegant, his appetite was anything but. He had eaten more than half of the huge bowl of wontons, and there were only 2 out of the 5 pancakes left that she had made. He was even starting on the 4th one right now. No wonder senior servant Gue had given her such a weird look. The corners of Chu Lian's mouth twitched. She sat down by his side with a strange expression, her lips set in a thin, straight line. She quickly ordered Mingyan to serve her a bowl of wontons, afraid that there would be none left if she were a step late. Mingyan also felt rather awkward over the whole situation. After serving the wontons to Chu Lian, she quickly retreated back into a corner. Chu Lian took the last pancake and placed it onto her plate, complaining, "So all that food yesterday really went into that bottomless pit you call a stomach?" He Changdi was stunned. How could he not discern the meaning in her words? She was hinting that he ate too much. He Sanlang cast a sideways glance in her direction. He was in a good mood from the delicious meal, so he would let her off this time. Once she saw that he wasn't going to reply, Chu Lian felt that there was no point in taunting him further. She wasn't a petty person anyway. Thus, she turned her attention to eating her breakfast. Chapter 48. Bloated from Eating, 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. In the time it had taken to change her clothes, the wontons had cooled down significantly, and it was just the right temperature to eat now. The scallion pancakes were as big as her 2 palms, so Mingyan came over to help her tear them into smaller pieces. However, Chu Lian stopped her. It was third young madam who had taught her how to make the pancakes, so of course, there was no one who understood them better. Mingyan quietly retreated behind third young madam. There was a small dish filled with an unknown sauce and shredded radish on the table. Chu Lian took a small spoon and poured half a spoon of the sauce onto the golden pancakes. Then, she picked up some shredded radish and placed them on top. It was only then that she folded up the pancake and took a bite. The couple sitting at the table didn't speak to each other. They simply ate their own dishes in peace, or so it appeared. Actually, He Changdi was watching Chu Lian's actions out of the corner of his eye. He was baffled by her pancake-eating technique, which he had never seen before in his entire life. He Changdi turned his gaze back to the original serving plate, but unfortunately, it was empty. The look in his eyes was deep and carried traces of disappointment. Chu Lian was so focused on eating the pancake on her plate that she didn't notice He Sanlang's expression. She hadn't been able to find a proper vegetable oil, and the quality of the flour here wasn't as good as back in the modern era, so the scallion pancakes weren't as tasty as she remembered. Chu Lian didn't like to eat oily foods, so she couldn't help wrinkling her brows as she ate. He Sanlang, who was watching her every move, noticed the change in her expression. Indignation on behalf of the pancake filled him to the brim. With jade chopsticks in hand, He Changdi turned his attention back to the remaining pieces on his personal serving dish. After a moment of pause, he picked one up and reached out to dip it in the small dish of sauce, placing the piece of pancake in his mouth directly after. It was much tastier than eating the pancake by itself. Although the sauce was a little salty, it also tasted fresh somehow. He had no idea what the sauce was made of. After learning the merits of this new technique, He Sanlang ate a few more pieces all in one go. When he ran out of pancake on his plate, he sent Mingyan, who was awaiting orders at the side, a meaningful look. Mingyan trembled under his gaze. She hurriedly lowered her head and tried to erase her presence. Even her breathing became lighter. Chu Lian was focused on polishing off the wontons in her bowl and hadn't noticed his little actions. However, she wasn't able to finish off the last piece of scallion pancake. After eating half of it, she placed it back onto her plate. Seeing that Chu Lian had pushed her bowl away and was looking like she was full, Mingyan quickly brought her a warm handkerchief to clean her hands. Google Tag. Command Push, Function, Google Tag. Display, div GPT, add 1505873300429-0. Without waiting for Chu Lian to take the handkerchief from Mingyan, He Changdi tapped on the surface in front of her and uttered a low command. Finish it, Chu Lian. She looked down at the last piece of pancake on her plate. It was a little cold by now, and it definitely wouldn't taste as good as when it had been freshly made. Chu Lian thought it looked utterly unappetizing and wasn't willing to eat it at all. What was up with this He Sanlang? It was bad enough that he wasn't willing to talk to her, but at least whenever he did, she could just act like she hadn't heard anything. However, now he was even trying to control her meals. She hadn't forgotten that he had purposely taken away her dinner yesterday. I'm not eating that. I'm already full. Actually, Changdi wasn't trying to stop her from wasting food. It was just that leaving such a delicacy uneaten was equivalent to a grave crime in his eyes, so he refused to sit by and watch Chu Lian commit such a sin. Finish it. There are many people who don't even have the chance to eat such good food. Chu Lian furrowed her brows, starting to feel annoyed. It was just a single piece of scallion pancake. What did it matter if she couldn't finish it? Did she absolutely need to force herself past her limits and make herself uncomfortable just to finish that one piece? I said I'm not eating it. If you want to finish it yourself. By now, senior servant Gue and the other maidservants were already wearing a set of strange expressions. Before they could properly recover, an even stranger scene began to play out before their very eyes. Sanlang didn't continue forcing Chu Lian to eat the remaining pancake. Instead, after giving her an unreadable glance, he reached over to the porcelain plate in front of Chu Lian and picked up the pancake with his jade chopsticks, placing the piece directly into his mouth. The pancake was a little cold and wasn't as delicious as the rest he had eaten earlier. However, the taste of the sauce and the shredded radish on the pancake was even stronger. Changdi finished Chu Lian's leftover half in just a few bites. His sudden action caused Chu Lian and everyone else in the room to freeze and stare. Chu Lian looked at him with a weird expression. Wasn't this guy disdainful of her? How could he just eat her leftover food without any care at all? She must be seeing things. It was only after he had swallowed the last bite of pancake that Sanlang finally realized what he had done. His originally cold expression stiffened. With one glance toward the wide-eyed Chu Lian, Sanlang quickly stood up and tossed out, "I'm going to the outer court," before striding out of the room. Chu Lian turned to watch him as he left. For some reason, he seemed like he was running away. Sanlang quickly stepped out of his courtyard and only slowed down when he finally reached his study in the outer court. There, he took the time to rub his stomach gingerly. Sanlang froze. It began to dawn on him that he had somehow lost his usual restraint on his appetite and had actually eaten too much. Chapter 49, Prince of Jin, 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. After Sanlang entered the study, he wrote a few letters and called for some servants to send them out. Then, at around 11 a.m., he left the estate. In the capital's Yuehang mansion, there was a fragrance-filled private compartment located on the third floor. Inside was a man dressed in an azure brocade robe leaning against a soft sofa. He was playing with 2 jade marbles, approximately the size of a dragon's eyes, in his hand. When the marbles collided, a beautiful, crisp clink would resound. His long, dark hair was draped loosely over his shoulders, like ebony silk floating atop the surface of a spring. Its smooth, sleek appearance was practically begging to be touched. Anyone would want to feel the soft, silken sensation of the strands sifting between their fingers and brushing against their palms. The man's features were absolute perfection. Paired with his fair skin, he didn't lose to Sanlang at all in looks. The man was resting on one of the armrests of the sofa, his other hand playing with the 2 jade marbles. His head was turned to look out the window next to him, where he watched the people moving about on the street below Yuehang Mansion. When the door creaked open, the man turned his head, letting the light from the window shine on his face. Had a stranger been in the room with him, they would have definitely gasped in surprise. This man adorned in brocade fabrics had eyes very different from most people. His light azure pupils resembled a piece of glass, clear but emotionless. When these extremely light pupils, so light that they were nearly non-existent, swept towards the person entering the room, a trace of emotion finally rippled across their depths. The corner of the man's mouth raised a little in the semblance of a smile. "Mr. Newlywed, pretty Sanlang, how could you bear to leave your sweet wife?" Changdi directed the bottomless depths of his own pupils at the man before him. The only thing he felt in his heart was an endless amount of exasperation. He took a few steps forward before bending at the waist in a bow. "Prince Jin." A glint flashed through the prince's azure pupils. His brows drew together, and he stopped playing with the marbles in his right hand. "Adi, too, did you get up on the wrong side of the bed today?" Or did you suffer my sister-in-law's wrath? Prince Jin asked, finding that his friend was acting strangely. When they had met just a few days ago, this guy had still been open and generous. Why did he seem like a completely different person after his wedding? Like he had aged a decade in that short amount of time. He Changdi sneered. Newlywed? If his wife wasn't that wicked woman Chu Lian, he might truly be a little happy about his new wife. Prince Jin was the fourth son of the current emperor. He wasn't born from the empress, and was the first son of consort Xian. Prince Jin's maternal grandfather was the grandson of one of the ministers of the court. Starting from when he was 8, He Changdi had served as a study companion to Prince Jin for 4 years. Following that, they had studied at the Imperial College together until they had graduated at the age of 16. Although they were registered as students at the Imperial Hanlin Academy, they didn't actually study there. The two of them had been good friends for years. Google Tag. Command Push, Function, Google Tag. Display, div GPT, add 1505873300429-0. Thus, without waiting for Prince Jin to excuse him from standing on ceremony, He Sanlang moved forward and took a seat opposite the prince. Your Highness, how is the task I entrusted to you a few days ago progressing? Prince Jin stared into the shadowed depths of He Sanlang's eyes. His relaxed expression finally disappeared. Adi, tell me honestly, what are you trying to do? In front of his best friend, Prince Jin even dispensed with addressing himself as this prince. He Changdi poured himself a cup of tea. It had most likely been brewed by one of the tea masters here in Yuehang Mansion at the time of Prince Jin's arrival. A while had passed since then, and the tea had turned slightly cold, its various spices all a jumbled mix. Instead of a proper cup of sancha, it was now just some rancid water with strange flavors. He had originally been a little thirsty, but upon seeing such a cup of tea, he lost all desire to drink. He abruptly thought of that wicked woman back at the Jing'an estate, who loved to show off her sancha brewing skills. Somehow, he hadn't seen her brew a single cup of sancha personally since their wedding day. Even the refreshments served in the parlor had become just simple clear water. Chapter 50, Prince of Jin, 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. He Sanlang covered up his teacup as thoughts swirled in his eyes. His gaze shifted to Prince Jin, who was sitting opposite him. Your Highness, I want to earn my merit through the military. For a moment, Prince Jin froze. The Great Wu dynasty had been founded for close to 30 years. The emperor was in the midst of reorganizing the imperial court, as there were too many founding officials around. There was only one method left for those who wanted to earn some merit and progress quickly through the ranks: military contributions. As for those who wanted to become influential through their qualifications or birthright, even the smart ones would need at least 5 years or more to make it. Although the inner lands of the Great Wu dynasty were currently prospering in peace, the borders were facing significant threats. The southern Xinjiang One people in Mingzhou to the south, the Tuhan and the barbarians in Liangzhou to the north, the Japanese pirates and the Goryeo Two people to the east. Even the west border faced the blonde, blue-eyed Uyghurs. He Sanlang's father, Count Jing'an himself, was stationed in Mingzhou. Since nothing unusual had happened at the border in recent years and their spies hadn't reported any movement from the neighboring countries either, the border armies had been slowly relaxing their guard. Without any battles to fight, even the most hardened and famous generals would lose their edge. Astonishment flashed through the prince's azure eyes. Adi, why would you choose the south border? If you want to earn some merit, wouldn't Mingzhou be better? Count He is there too. Furthermore, the spies have already reported that the southern Xinjiang people are starting to make their move. Although Prince Jin wasn't the heir to the throne, he still had access to some secret documents, thanks to the crown prince. Out of all of his imperial siblings, he was undoubtedly the one closest to the crown prince. A glimmer of light flashed through He Changdi's lowered gaze as he said, "As long as my father's there, I won't go." Prince Jin was startled, but he continued on, fretting worriedly as he said, Adi, although we were given excellent evaluations in the Imperial College and you're skilled at martial arts, you don't have any actual battle experience and you've never led any troops before. You should know better than me what kind of person Imperial Duke Lu is. Imperial Duke Lu was also known as the Great General Qian, who was currently guarding the northern border. He was the man who had taught Prince Jin and He Changdi horseback riding and archery when they were young, and he was also a very strict and stubborn man. Going to the northern border under the command of Imperial Duke Lu was equivalent to suffering endless hardship. Furthermore, there would be zero empathy from the Duke himself. It would be a true test of his endurance. Never mind the noble sons. Hardly any of the minor officials' sons would volunteer to go to the borders when they knew suffering and hardship lied ahead. Even though the northern border had been at peace for almost 10 years, Liangzhou had a terrible climate where winters were extremely cold and summers were extremely hot. There weren't any good farmlands, and all the eye could see was only the endless, dry expanse of dull grassland, occasionally cut by the army tents pitched out in the wilderness. If they tried to go further north, there was a tall, snowy mountain. It was very different from the bustling of the capital and was nearly primitive in nature. Frankly speaking, even criminals wouldn't be exiled to such a place. The citizens of Liangzhou City reportedly never saw a single grain of rice from their harvests all year round. Although the city was half the size of the capital, it didn't even have 1/20th of the population. If he could manage to earn some military achievements in the northern border, then all would be fine. However, if he failed, there was a rule at the border that stated that all soldiers without military achievements would have to stay there for a whole 5 years. Google tag. Command push, function, Google tag. Display, div, gpt, add 1505873300429-0. 5 years. For the people of the Great Wu Dynasty, whose average lifespan was only about 30 years or so, 5 years was an extremely long time. With He Changdi's noble birth, as long as he wasn't good for nothing, he could still get a 4th-rank official title in that same amount of time. Rushing off to the northern border like this without considering the consequences was practically a gamble in Prince Jin's eyes. And a reckless gamble at that. How simple did he think it was to earn merit at the northern border? Firstly, would he even be able to find an enemy powerful enough to earn achievements for defeating? Secondly, once he encountered such an enemy, would he even be strong enough to take them down? If something went awry, what would happen to the He family? And what about him? Was He Changdi even thinking about his best friend? Your Highness, I've already made up my mind. Prince Jin's unusual azure eyes locked onto He Changdi. His stare was unwavering, searching for where he could pierce through his defenses and figure out what this best friend of his was thinking. Adi, you have to give me a good reason. Otherwise, I'm not going to help you. Chapter 51. Mother-in-Law 1. When Prince Jin met He Changdi's gaze, he could see faint grief reflected in his unreadable depths. Your Highness, there are some things I can't tell you now, but I can promise you this. There's a reason behind why I absolutely have to go to the northern border. By the time He Sanlang left Yuehang Mansion, it was already past 1 p.m. Prince Jin stood by the window and watched as his best friend's carriage disappeared around the corner of the street. He then turned away, appearing to be in deep thought. When Chu Lian finished her breakfast, she immediately headed to Matriarchy's courtyard to give her daily greetings. All the ladies of the Jingon estate were gathered in Qingxi Hall, except the bedridden Countess Jingon. The moment Chu Lian entered the hall, Matriarchy immediately turned to look at her. When she saw her dressed in light blue, she recalled that He Sanlang had also been wearing the same color when he had dropped by Qingxi Hall on his way out this morning. Matriarchy smiled. Excluding her 2 nieces, Chu Lian was the youngest in the family. After she greeted the matriarch, she was pulled up to Matriarchy's side. Lianer, have you gotten used to living here in the estate these past few days? Matriarchy spoke in a warm, friendly tone, tinged with that special kindness the older generation always seemed to have. It was the kind of tone that made others want to draw closer to an elder. Chu Lian nodded and looked at the matriarch, her eyes crystal clear and moist. Yes, I have. Granddaughter-in-law thanks grandmother for her concern. Sanlang went out so early today. I'm afraid he won't be back until evening. Why don't you and your eldest sister-in-law come over to eat with grandmother for the midday meal? Chu Lian nodded and agreed. After sitting at Qingxi Hall for about an hour, she went to visit Countess Jingan's courtyard together with Lady Zhou. Even before they entered, they could hear Countess Jingan coughing terribly. Lady Zhou frowned. It was at this moment that Countess Jingan's personal maidservant, Miaozhen, stepped out to retrieve some medicine. When Miaozhen spotted the two mistresses standing at the entrance, she greeted them. "Eldest young madam, third young madam, good morning. What happened to mother? Why does it seem like her condition has worsened since yesterday?" Lady Zhou asked Miaozhen with her brows drawn together. Grimacing, Miaozhen replied, "This servant doesn't know either. The medicine appeared effective at first. During the past few weeks, Madam could even get out of bed and occasionally walk about. However, these days, the medicine seems to have stopped working completely. Even though Madam has been drinking it regularly, there's been no change to her condition." While standing next to Lady Zhou, Chu Lian dipped into her memories and tried to recall what she had read in the novel. There had been no mention of Countess Jingan's exact illness. However, looking at the symptoms, if it wasn't pneumonia, then it was most likely tuberculosis. In this era, there was almost no chance of treating illnesses like those. They could only extend their lives for a bit with medicine. "Go ahead and brew the medicine. They'll go in to look at mother with my sister-in-law." By the time they finished visiting their mother-in-law, Lady Lu had already gone to sleep from exhaustion. Her face was extremely pale. Even while sleeping, she still looked haggard from her extended illness. They heard from Miaozhen that Lady Lu hadn't had a proper meal in days. She couldn't keep anything down due to her sickness. She had been able to eat those pastries that Cook Zhou had made previously, but now that Cook Zhou had passed on, Countess Jingan wasn't able to stomach eating anything else. Chapter 52. Mother-in-Law, 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. When the two sisters-in-law stepped out of Lady Lu's courtyard, they made a turn into one of the estate's small gardens. They each had a crimson jade bangle in hand. The vibrancy of the bangle's color made it obvious how priceless it was. Lady Lu had come from a great noble family. Her dowry back then had been extremely rich and filled with extravagant treasures. This was something that Lady Zhou told Chu Lian much later on. Chu Lian looked at the bangle in her hands awkwardly. These two red jade bangles were a pair. She and Lady Zhou had each gotten one. Chu Lian had never seen such a valuable accessory in her life before, and although she had received quite a few treasures from the tea ceremony that day, they paled in comparison to this red jade bangle. Lady Zhou caught sight of her uneasy expression and smiled reassuringly. "Since Mother decided to give these to us, just keep it. Mother won't be happy if you reject her gift." Chu Lian could only nod. Since she had already accepted it back in Lady Lu's room, she couldn't possibly go back to return it at this point. Lady Zhou passed her own bangle to one of her maidservants, instructing her to wrap it up and keep it carefully. She then pulled Chu Lian to a winding corridor covered in purple wisterias. As they walked slowly along the corridor, Lady Zhou suddenly sighed. Actually, Mother probably doesn't have much left in her dowry. These two bangles are probably the last of the more valuable ones. Noticing the perplexed expression on Chu Lian's face and wanting to tell her more, Lady Zhou waved away the personal maidservants following behind them. The maidservants hurriedly stopped where they stood, allowing Lady Zhou to pull Chu Lian further away from the extra listening ears. Once there weren't any outsiders around to listen in, Lady Zhou began to open up. "Third sister, I'm sure you must have heard the details of Mother's illness." Although He Sailing had never told her about it before, Chu Lian knew how serious Countess Jingan's illness was. The book had also mentioned that Countess Jingan was frequently bedridden. Chu Lian nodded. "You might know a few bits and pieces. The imperial physicians don't have any way to treat Mother's illness. They can only delay its progression with specially made medicine. But the medicine requires various types of expensive herbs, and quite a few of them cost over 1,000 gold taels. Although House Jingan is quite influential, Father isn't around to manage the household, and he's not the best at generating income for the family either. If not for the fewer mouths to feed and our simple expenses, as well as the matriarch occasionally adding some income from her personal businesses, the household would be living in a much poorer state. Mother's medicine costs a lot, and in the beginning, The money came from the household accounts. Lady Zhou raised a single finger. 1,000 taels. It costs 1,000 taels just to buy the herbs to make her medicine every month. Father earns 1,000 strings of coins annually as a general. If you put together all the earnings from all the holdings and stores under our family, that's only about 1,000 more strings of coins. House Jing'an paid Countess Jing'an's medicine fees for 2 years. Afterwards, Countess Jing'an told Lady Zhou to remove that expense from the household accounts. Countess Jing'an then paid for her medicine out of her own dowry. In the next few years, Countess Jing'an's dowry was close to spent. There wasn't much left to her name now. Furthermore, the Liu family had broken one of the emperor's taboos a few years back, so they had been demoted. The entire clan had left and settled down in the countryside, near Luoyang. Thus, Lady Liu was left all alone in the capital, and without any financial support from her maiden family, her dowry dwindled down even faster. Chu Lian was shocked by the revelations. Although she had just arrived in this era, after listening to Shi Yin and the other maidservants chatting over the past few days, she had started to learn the approximate value of money in this Great Wu dynasty. The copper coins used in the current era were Kaiyuan coins. 1,000 coins could be exchanged for 1 silver tael. There were 1,000 coins in a string of coins. Without taking into account the fluctuation of bronze and silver prices, and going by a common family standard of living in the Great Wu dynasty, 10 silver taels was enough to support a family of 3 for a year. Even the minor stewards in the Jing'an estate weren't given more than a single silver tael as their monthly salary. Meanwhile, Countess Jing'an required over 10,000 strings of coins every year for medicine alone. This was an extremely shocking amount. Google tag. Command push, function, Google tag. Display, div GPT, add 1505873300429-0. No wonder Lady Zhou had said that Countess Jing'an had barely anything left in her dowry by now. Count Jing'an's annual salary was only enough to cover a month of medicine costs for Lady Liu. Seeing the surprise and shock in Chu Lian's eyes, Lady Zhou patted her hand. I'm not telling you all this to put any pressure on you. I only wanted to let you realize how well Mother treats us, despite how poor she is. I hope you continue to treat her well in the future. TL note, 1,000 bronze coins equals 1 string of bronze coins equals 1 tael of silver. Count Jing'an earns 1,000 taels a year, but Countess Jing'an spends 1,000 taels a month on medicine. Poor Countess. Chapter 53, Dowry 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Chu Lian nodded. Of course she was going to treat her mother-in-law well. Although she had only met Lady Liu a few times, Chu Lian could tell that her mother-in-law was a person of integrity, someone kind and gentle. If she wasn't, matriarch he wouldn't have doted on her so much, at least, not to the point of personally visiting Lady Liu's courtyard. The fact that she did said a lot. By the time the two of them finished their stroll and returned to Qingxi Hall, it was nearing lunch. When senior servant Liu saw that the 2 young madams had arrived, she called for the maidservants to begin serving the meal. Lady Zhou's 2 daughters had already been brought to the parlor by their nursemaids and were seated. With the support of her maidservants, matriarch he also settled down into her seat. The round table was quickly filled with dishes. However, despite the happy sight that the feast made, matriarch he sighed. All the ladies in our family are here, except for your mother. If only she were well enough to sit here with us. After matriarchy's words, everyone at the table sunk into silence. Senior servant Liu noticed that the atmosphere had turned bad and quickly tried to change the topic. Madam, look here. There's hasma today. Hasma was one of the most valuable food ingredients. It was good for beauty and keeping the lungs healthy. In the modern era, it was famous for its expensive price tag. Although Chu Lian was a foodie, due to her economical constraints, she hadn't actually seen any dishes made with hasma before. After hearing senior servant Liu point out the hasma, Chu Lian shifted her gaze over and saw a small enamel bowl with a green turtle pattern. It was half filled with something black. Chu Lian. This was hasma? Chu Lian couldn't suppress the corners of her mouth from twitching. She really should have known better. Considering the events that had transpired over the past few days, She should have just dropped any and all expectations she had for the cuisine here. There was no hope for this damned Great Wu Dynasty's food. She was better off expecting nothing. That way, at least she wouldn't be disappointed all the time. She wouldn't have minded if it were any other ingredient, but this was Hazma. Even if you had the money, you wouldn't necessarily be able to buy it. They actually placed it in a wok and just boiled it, just like that. And they even made it into something this black and unappetizing, like it was some poisonous, dark arts cuisine. Who would even dare to eat this? Chu Lian's interest had been piqued at first, but upon looking at a Hazma dish like this, she just couldn't gather up the desire to eat it at all. Chu Lian shrunk back into her seat. Someone else could have that delicacy instead. After senior servant Lu reminded her of the highlight of the meal, Matriarch He immediately recovered from her sadness and smiled at her two granddaughters-in-law. The Empress Dowager was the one who sent over this Hazma. It's a very rare delicacy. It's good for women, so why don't the two of you share it later on? Lady Zhou had eaten Hazma before it and knew of its benefits. Some of her anticipation shone through in her eyes, but Chu Lian really didn't have the courage to eat that black dish. She courteously said, "Since there's so little Hazma, why don't you have it, grandmother? My body is perfectly healthy. There's no need for me to eat it." Since Chu Lian had said so, it wouldn't be seemly for Lady Zhou to take all of the Hazma for herself, so she said something along the same lines. Google tag. Command push, function, Google tag. Display, div GPT, add 1505873300429-0. They weren't able to change Matriarchy's mind, so senior servant Lu split the bowl of black Hazma into 3 portions. It wasn't suitable for children to eat, so they didn't give any to the 2 young children present. Senior servant Lu was smiling as she passed a white bowl containing the Hazma to Chu Lian. "Third young madam, you're quite lucky, aren't you? Even the Empress Dowager might only get to eat Hazma once or twice a year. You've managed to come at just the right time to have some." Chu Lian felt awkward and wanted to cry. She didn't want to be here right now, okay? Not if it meant she had to eat that. Finally, she had no other choice. Chu Lian forced that small bowl of black Hazma into her mouth and down her throat. Honestly speaking, it tasted terrible. The Hazma had been fried and boiled so much that it was now too salty to even taste. The only thing her tongue could discern when she put it in her mouth was salt. All of the original flavor had been completely lost. After she finished eating it, she quickly washed it down with a bowl of tasteless soup. This meal she had at Qingxi Hall was one of the most painful she had ever had. TL note, here we go. I know you're expecting the picture by now. I have no idea what the dark arts version Chu Lian is eating looks like. So I found a normal picture instead. XD, I've eaten this before and it's tasteless, just like bird's nest. It's usually eaten as a dessert with rock sugar and red dates, like the picture below. It's the slightly translucent thing on the spoon. Hazma with longan and rock sugar, guys. I don't know what to tell you. But Hazma is basically fatty tissue from frogs' fallopian tubes. And it's considered a luxury because it's expensive. XD, here's a link to the wiki page if you're curious, https://n. Wikipedia.org/wiki/Hazma. Chapter 54, Dowry 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Chu Lian had swallowed down the Hazma like it was bitter medicine. However, she saw that Matriarch He and Lady Zhou were slowly savoring it. They would alternate between taking a single bite of Hazma and drinking a mouthful of soup, as if they were eating some rare delicacy. If she hadn't personally seen that charred Hazma being split between the 3 bowls, Chu Lian might even have thought that they had been served different dishes. All the tea served here was sancha. Chu Lian didn't dare to deviate too much from common sense in front of Matriarch He. Essentially, she was stuck. She couldn't ask for another drink, but she couldn't stomach drinking the sancha either. After the meal, Matriarch He and Lady Zhou were given wet handkerchiefs by the maidservants. They then elegantly dabbed at their lips and rinsed their mouths. Matriarch He wanted to take a nap in the late afternoon, so Chu Lian took the chance to escape back to her own Songtao court. She really didn't dare to stay any longer, lest matriarchy force her to eat something else equally weird. He Sanling still hadn't returned in the afternoon. When Chu Lian got back to her courtyard, the first thing she did was gulp down 3 cups of plain water before gargling with some fine salt. Only then did she manage to get rid of that strange taste in her mouth. After being tormented for half the day, Chu Lian was finally able to rest. She leaned against the sofa by the window, relaxing as she enjoyed the cool summer breeze. It was gentle as it blew in from the outside, perfectly comfortable to take a nap in. Yin and the other maidservants noticed how drowsy she looked. They brought over a thin blanket to drape over her before they quietly retreated, leaving her in peace. When Chu Lian finally woke up, almost 2 hours had passed. The moment she raised her arm, she caught sight of the red jade bangle on her wrist and thought of what her sister-in-law, Lady Zhou, had told her that morning. She wrinkled her brows for a moment before calling out, "Yin." Yin hurriedly walked in. "Third young madam, do you have any orders for this servant?" Chu Lian got up from the sofa. Her right hand toyed with the lustrous bangle on her left wrist as she said, "Let's go. I want to look at my dowry in the storeroom." "Ah, you want to look at your dowry?" Yin clearly hadn't expected that Chu Lian would abruptly ask for something like that. The dowry had been selected before the wedding, and Chu Lian had overseen the addition of every item on the list. She was probably the one who knew best how much everything was worth. Why did she still want to look at the dowry? Yes, what's wrong? Am I not allowed to look at my own dowry? Yin quickly shook her head. "Please wait for a moment. This servant will go and retrieve the key to the storeroom now." Chu Lian was a little excited as she waved Yin away with a smile. Go. At the very least, she was a legitimate daughter of House Ingwa. Although she wasn't a favored one, the House of Duke Ingwa had to have given her a decent dowry. She had been married out to the House of Count Jing'an, after all. In her previous life, she had had to earn every single cent of her money. However, after coming to the Great Wu Dynasty, she had gotten a fortune that was all hers without having to do anything at all. Just thinking about it made her quite happy. Google Tag. Command push, function, Google Tag. Display, div GPT, add 15058733000429-0. In the Great Wu Dynasty, all daughters who married out of their houses had their dowries recorded with the local authorities. Their dowries were their personal assets. Even if they divorced their husbands later on, the women could take every single bit of their dowries away with them, no questions asked. This was one of the laws of marriage in the Great Wu Dynasty. Thus, the more dowry the new brides brought with them, the more respected they would be in their new households. In this thriving capital, the amount of dowry was a measure of how favored the daughter was in her maiden family. With a thicker dowry, they would be able to hold their heads high, even in gatherings with all the other noble wives later on. The novel had not described Chu Lian's dowry, and since Chu Lian had entered this Great Wu Dynasty right at the time of her wedding, she hadn't had any time to take a look for herself. Thus, she was still in the dark about the size of her personal wealth. TL note, while waiting for more chapters, why not try reading something new? You Supernatural Girlfriend is being translated by my dear friend, Grace. There's a brave female lead who can see spirits, and a novelist who's naive about romance as her male lead. With the help of the spirits, she solves crimes while working as an assistant for the male lead. The female lead takes her situation rather well, like Chu Lian, and tries her best to power through the problems that she faces. I got hooked by the unexpected twists in the story and the comedy. I've been told that it does get a little scary later on, what with murder and ghosts around, but it's a good story, give it a try. 3. Chapter 55, Dowry, 3. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Yin led the way and senior servant Gue followed by Chu Lian's side. However, both of them had their heads lowered with strange expressions on their faces. Their gazes drifted frequently to Chu Lian, who was clearly in a good mood with a smile on her lips. Songtao Court was not far from the couple's storeroom. They were able to reach their destination in just 5 minutes. Yin instructed the maidservant watching the door to leave. Then, she personally opened one of the rooms with a key. "Third young madam, Most of your dowry was placed here. Although the room wasn't very well lit, it was still daytime. So the light streaming in from the window allowed Chu Lian to clearly see everything inside. It was a large room with a few rows of antique shelves. The shelves were completely empty, as were the few quality open cabinets scattered around. Right at the back of the room, there were a few red-painted wooden boxes placed in a corner. Thanks to the significant empty space, the red boxes were extremely eye-catching. The moment she entered, Chu Lian couldn't keep up the slight upward tilt of her lips. She looked around the room with widened eyes before turning to look at Senior Servant Gue. Senior Servant Gue shot Shiyin a look, and Shiyin hurriedly stepped forward, holding onto Chu Lian's arm. "Third young madam, why don't you take a seat over there? This servant will bring over the boxes with Momo to let third young madam look over everything." Chu Lian looked suspiciously at Shiyin, who avoided her gaze. She let herself be led to the table without a word. Following that, Senior Servant Gue and Shiyin set down 4 or 5 boxes in front of her. Although they were wooden and about as tall as a person's waist, the 2 women alone could carry them. It was clear that there wasn't much in them. Senior Servant Gue pulled out a list wrapped in red leather and passed it to Chu Lian. She carefully picked her words as she said, "Third young madam, this is the list of all the items in your dowry. Take a look and see if there's anything wrong." When Chu Lian had instructed Shiyin to retrieve the key to the storeroom, Senior Servant Gue had been thinking over why Chu Lian wanted to see her dowry. In the end, she decided that it was most likely because Chu Lian was afraid that something was missing from it and wanted to go through every item once again. Chu Lian was smiling as she took the list and opened it. Her almond-shaped eyes swept down the list once and mentally tallied them up. Upon seeing that there was a total of 99 items, she inwardly nodded, satisfied with the amount. Thus, she started reading out the list with some excitement, beginning from the very first item. She even got Senior Servant Gue and Shiyin to bring over the item to let her see. Exquisite 4-season screens, Chu Lian read. Senior Servant Gue and Shiyin exchanged glances before pulling out a screen frame and several embroidered screens, placing them on the table in front of Chu Lian. Shiyin spoke up timidly. "Third young madam, if we set up this screen and take it apart again, the embroidery might get damaged. If you don't need to use it right now, it would be better not to set it up." Chu Lian was completely stunned. First, she looked at the description in the dowry again before looking up at the item before her eyes. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The elegantly named, exquisite 4-season screens was clearly just a few embroidered screens with some pieces of wood painted over. Although she wasn't an expert at appraising the value of things, she could still tell just by looking at it that these screens weren't worth much at all. They were probably barely worth 10 taels or less. After looking at a few more items, they were all about the same as the screens. They seemed extravagant, but weren't of any actual value at all. While a little pretty, they were nothing compared to real treasures. Google tag. Command push, function, Google tag. Display, div GPT, add 15058733000429-0. Finally, Chu Lian got too lazy to look at the rest of them. She waved her hand and got Senior Servant Gue to close all the boxes and put them back. Then, she held the dowry list in her hands and blanked out. She had looked through the list carefully. There were almost 100 items in her dowry, but none of them were really worth anything. Judging by Senior Servant Gue's attitude, the only thing of value was a small yellow jade seal. She had already taken it out and personally put it into the pouch she carried with her at all times. Other than the 100 items here, there was nothing else. There were no shops, no holdings, or even any farmland. Not a single one. Chu Lian laughed bitterly to herself in her heart. So she wasn't really all that lucky after all. Compared to Lady Lu's dowry, her dowry was way too shabby. Chapter 56, A Heart-to-Heart Talk, 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valère novels. Please read from the original source. She folded the dowry list back up and began to play with it, tapping it against her other palm. Chu Lian abruptly asked, "Momo, I can't really remember. Was there any money in my dowry?" Senior Servant Gue cast a careful glance at her. Afraid some misunderstanding would arise in Chu Lian's heart, she said in a measured tone, Of course there's money. Why wouldn't there be? Due to 6th Mrs. Unhappiness over the match, on the day of her marriage, senior servant Gue had kept the banknotes that the presiding lady of the house, the wife of House Ingwa's heir, had sent over. After Chu Lian had married over, she had been frightened by the way her mistress and her new husband were interacting, so she had completely forgotten about the money in her care. Finally, something that wouldn't disappoint her. Chu Lian's eyes instantly lit up and, with a degree of urgency, she asked, "How much?" Senior servant Gue looked a little put on the spot. She awkwardly chuckled and held up 5 fingers. Chu Lian returned the smile. 500 taels? Senior servant Gue's eyes widened in shock. She hadn't expected Chu Lian to get the figure right. Wouldn't most noble ladies guess 5,000 taels instead? Seeing Chu Lian smiling happily, Xian's heart felt like it was being crushed. Conversely, Chu Lian's seeming happiness and contentment with that sum made her heart ache even more for her mistress. Although the house of Duke Ingwa had no qualified successors and was slowly becoming a shell of its former self, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. When the main branch's illegitimate 4th Miss had gotten married, due to the favor of the main branch's legitimate wife, she had been sent out from the house with 1,000 taels of silver as dowry. Their young miss was a legitimate daughter of House Ingwa, yet she had to suffer this kind of treatment. 6th Miss, Xian called out in a low voice. Every time this girl called out to her with a voice that sounded as if she was about to cry, Chu Lian knew that Xian had probably gotten sad over her circumstances without being able to see it from a lighter perspective. So, when Chu Lian spoke again, it was with a clear, calm voice. What's there to be sad about? 500 taels isn't a small sum either. A family of 3 can live for a year with 10 taels. Furthermore, my mother died when I was young. Are you really expecting a motherless child to be treated the same as a child with a mother? Although my dowry's a little small, I've married a good husband, haven't I? The family elders here are all easy to get along with, too. What is there to be unhappy about? I've already accepted all this, so can't you guys accept it too? Anyway, who cares if there's less money? We just have to earn more ourselves. In this world, there's nothing easier to solve than a lack of money. Buried in Chu Lian's words were her incredible self-confidence and willpower. She had been able to stand strong and unyielding in order to survive in that technologically advanced world, where humans had become even more twisted. How could the simple civilization of this great Wu dynasty pose a problem to her? To enjoy life, you have to be able to bear with its stresses. This was something a smart woman should know. Senior servant Gue and Xian were shaken by Chu Lian's words. Since senior servant Gue was older and more experienced than Xian, she recovered a little more quickly. She nodded, gratified that the tender, young flower she had raised had finally broken free from its bindings and blossomed into a beautifully fragrant bud. Chu Lian was no longer a single, lone sprout that was struggling to grow in a swamp. However, Xian was still in a daze. Chu Lian's sweet, clear voice was still ringing in her ears. In this world, there's nothing easier to solve than a lack of money. Google Tag. Command push, function, Google Tag. Display, div GPT, add 1505873300429-0. D. What an arrogant, yet confident phrase that was. How many humans in this world would toil their lives away, maybe even to the point of throwing away their lives, for the sake of a few dirty, copper coins? The saying, "Everyone works for money," didn't spring up from nothing. Xian could almost see a faint, white glow around Chu Lian. It was almost like she was a god who should be revered by all men. She realized that her mistress was looking at her with a gentle gaze. Suddenly, immense relief flooded through her. The unfair treatment at the Ingwa estate and the old grievances buried inside her instantly turned into tiny golden specks and disappeared. Yes, as mistress commands it. This servant will always obey. 6th Mississippi. Chu Lian tilted her head. Upon seeing that Xian had burst into a bright smile, exposing her 2 cute little canines, Chu Lian also felt happy for her. This girl had complex issues hidden in her heart. If she could let go of all her mental burdens just like today, then maybe she wouldn't die in vain like Chu Lian had. TL note, thanks to suggestions from readers on Discord, and also comments asking for teasers. I'll be trying out something new this weekend. Go to the next chapter page for a teaser game. Winking and laughing. Chapter 57. A Heart-to-Heart Talk 2. Alright, now that we're done looking, let's go back. Chu Lian stood up and led senior servant Gu and Xian back to Songtao Court. After they returned to their courtyard, senior servant Gu handed the purse containing all the banknotes over to Chu Lian, holding it up with both hands. Third young madam, this is the money that the lady of the house gave to me to keep for you on your wedding day. Chu Lian took the purse and opened it up. As expected, there was a stack of 100 tael notes, 5 in total. They were all issued by Dadong Bank. She took out one note and held it out to senior servant Gu. Momo, keep this 100 taels in case of emergency. I'll keep the rest. Senior servant Gu waved her hands as she looked at the 100 tael note. No. This is third young madam's dowry. How could this old servant keep it? Rest assured, we don't need to spend any money within the estate. There won't be any emergencies at all. As she finished speaking, the corners of her eyes turned red. Thinking back to the days in the Ingwer estate, Sixth Miss had always hoarded her money like it was treasure, afraid that these lowly servants would find her money and steal it. Although senior servant Gu didn't hold that kind of behavior against Chu Lian, she couldn't help but feel that small distance between them. As close as they were still master and servant in the end. A grudge would be the worst thing that could come between them. Chu Lian smiled. Of course she could guess what senior servant Gu was thinking. She inwardly pursed her lips, scolding the original Chu Lian for being too silly. No matter how much senior servant Gu tried to reject the money, Chu Lian still pushed the note in senior servant Gui's hands in the end. Momo, keep it. You never know what might happen. It's better to have this money in hand, rather than none at all. Money can solve a lot of problems in this world. Anyway, I still have 400 taels with me. It's not a small sum at all. I've finally learned to let go of some things. Money at hand is meant to be spent anyway. Why be calculative about who's keeping it? Momo, I was too narrow-minded in the past, and I was in the wrong. Please don't take it to heart. Hearing Chu Lian speak like that, senior servant Gu couldn't hold back her emotions any longer. Tears streamed down her cheeks and she let out a choked sob, the thin banknote gripped tightly in her hands. She couldn't find the strength to speak and could only nod. Any servant who served their masters with all their heart would want to earn their acknowledgement and trust. Now that she had earned Chu Lian's trust today, senior servant Gu felt that the grievances she had suffered in the past were all worth it. Within her heart, she silently said, Madam, did you see that? Young Miss has grown up and matured. You can rest in peace now. When Chu Lian saw that senior servant Gu had lost control of her emotions, she wanted to cheer her up. She drew closer and answered senior servant Gui's teary expression with a bright smile, her eyes narrowing into crescents. Why? Does Momo think I've given too little? Just wait till I earn more money. I'll let you count the notes until your hands are sore. Senior servant Gu burst into a chuckle and glared playfully at Chu Lian. Third young madam has such a silver tongue. I can back my words up with results. Momo, don't you trust me? Of course I do. Momo trusts you the most. Hee. Senior servant Gu watched the pretty young flower before her, freed from burden. She felt that she had never been as light-hearted as she was now. Sixth Miss had been restrained and gloomy in the past. The current Sixth Miss was like a beautiful piece of jade, cleansed of all impurities. She practically radiated a comfortable warmth that drew others in. As for whether Sixth Miss was merely boasting about earning more money or not, what did that matter? As long as they were all peaceful and happy, she would be content. This chapter's teaser erased the teaser line for this chapter. Hearing Chu Lian speak like that, senior servant Gu couldn't hold back her emotions any longer. Tears streamed down her cheeks and she let out a choked sob. What do you think happened? Write in the comments below and come back tomorrow to find out whether your guesses are correct. XD. Chapter 58, Returning Home Late, 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Sanlang only returned to the estate when night fell. He stopped over at Qingxi Hall before returning to Songtao Court. After spending the entire day running about and meeting up with others, he hadn't eaten much in the way of food, but he had taken plenty of drinks. Lai Yue could clearly sense the slight pressure hanging around his master today. There was a cold expression adorning his handsome face, hidden in the shadows as he moved about the grounds. His lips were slightly pursed, and with the way his eyes were glinting beneath the starlight, his master resembled a goshawk crouching in the dark, lying in wait for the chance to catch his prey. This bloodthirsty goshawk currently had his eyes fixed on Songtao Court, where third young madam lived. Lai Yue gathered up the courage to remind him of his current state. Young master, it's getting late. You've drunk quite a lot outside. Perhaps it might be better to go to bed early today. Right after Lai Yue finished speaking, Changdi strode into the courtyard without even giving him a glance. When the two older servants guarding the door saw that the young master had returned, they quickly bent in greeting. Changdi stood in the corridor outside the parlor after entering Songtao Court. He looked towards the main bedchamber, which was already shrouded in darkness, and the corners of his mouth tugged upwards indifferently. As expected, this wicked woman had never treated him as her husband, just like in their previous life. She wasn't concerned at all, even though he had returned late. He thought that things would be different this time, seeing how she had been acting these 2 days, but he was clearly just being stupid for even hoping so. Lai Yue didn't dare to say anything else and simply followed Sanlang to the study. When Lai Yue cast a sideways glance at his master, he noticed the dark circles under his eyes and his unhealthy complexion. Then he recalled the earlier string of meetings where his master had been drinking but hadn't had a bite to eat. He immediately said, "Young master, this servant will go to the kitchen and bring you some soup to help you sober up." Sanlang rubbed his throbbing temples and shooed Lai Yue away. Just as Lai Yue was about to leave, he heard Changdi say, "Check if there's anything to eat and bring it here together with the soup." Lai Yue made a sound of agreement and quickly left the study. Changdi sat behind his desk, leaning back in the chair. There was only a single flickering lamp lit in the study, casting shadows over his handsome face and adding a tinge of pallor and fragility to it. Sanlang's second brother was on duty in the Left Military Guards. The Left Military Guards were formerly part of the Yulin Army and were split into the Dragon Guards and the Tiger Guards. The Dragon Guards were carefully picked from the families of the military officials, while the Tiger Guards were top martial experts selected from martial arts competitions and camps. Google Tag. Command Push Function Google Tag. Display div GPT add 1505873300429-0. When you were born in better circumstances, you'd have plenty more opportunities. The Tiger Guards were supposed to be on patrol in the palace today, but the commander of the Yulin Army, He Lin, had been sent out of the capital and had taken the Tiger Guards along with him. He Lin had served in the Tiger Guards, so he was closer to them. Thus, patrol duty had fallen to the Dragon Guards. Amongst the Dragon Guards on patrol today was the second young master of the Jing'an estate, He Changjue. In his past life, due to events happening during the patrol on this day, all of the Dragon Guards had been punished by martial law. As the leader of the Dragon Guards, He Changjue had been punished more heavily than the rest and was removed from the Left Military Guards. His legs never recovered properly, and he was never able to practice martial arts again. The Tiger Guards also started suppressing the Dragon Guards, causing a drop in their performance. After 2 months, they were no longer performing like they had before. Within a year, they were completely ousted from the Yulin Army. The Dragon Guards had ceased to exist. TL note, there'll be one more teaser game for the next chapter tomorrow. Let me know if you liked having these one-line teasers, and I'll continue them if there's enough support. 3. This chapter's teaser. Here's the teaser line for this chapter. His lips were slightly pursed, and with the way his eyes were glinting beneath the starlight, his master resembled a goshawk crouching in the dark, lying in wait for the chance to catch his prey. What do you think happened? Write in the comments below, and come back tomorrow to find out whether your guesses are correct. XD. Chapter 59. Returning home late, 2. This chapter has been stolen from Valère novels. Please read from the original source. This afternoon, He Sanlang had specially gone looking for his second brother before his patrol, and then had followed him into the palace. After waiting under a lush apricot tree in the outer palace, he had caught a little girl falling from the apricot tree. This little girl was 10-year-old Princess Liao, the child of the Emperor and Imperial concubine Wei. Imperial concubine Wei was in favor with the Emperor, and thus, Princess Liao also became one of the Emperor's beloved children. Imperial concubine Wei didn't have any other children, let alone any princes, so her only daughter was extremely important to her. In his previous life, Princess Liao had climbed the apricot tree out of mischief and had fallen off one of the courtyard walls, hitting the back of her head and dying later on. The Emperor and Imperial concubine Wei had flown into a rage and punished the dragon guards who had been on patrol that day. In this life, He Sanlang had saved Princess Liao, so naturally, the dragon guards were spared from punishment. A heroic deed like this should have been announced publicly with great reward. However, Princess Liao was already 10. If this were to be announced, the princess's reputation might be damaged. Thus, He Sanlang requested that the Emperor hide this matter. Seeing that He Sanlang was smart and sensible, the Emperor had a good impression of him and asked what kind of reward he would like. He Sanlang refused to mention any reward, but made a small request of the Emperor. He also politely rejected Imperial concubine Wei's offer of rewards. The moment he left the palace, he was taken by his second brother to a restaurant, where all the dragon guards on patrol had thanked him. There, he couldn't avoid drinking a round of wine with them. He Changjue drank a little too much and leaned against his younger brother, asking him whether he would use this opportunity to enter the imperial court. He Sanlang looked at his oblivious older brother and could only shake his head. As sons of a military house, the imperial court and the capital weren't places they could easily step into. Unfortunately, it was no longer the era of the previous emperor. The current emperor favored civil officials over the military. The sons of the military families couldn't possibly join the imperial examinations. They could only reach a high position through military achievements. They might not have any inkling of it now, but if they couldn't stabilize their power base in 3 to 5 years' time, then it would be hard for them to gain any traction in the capital as a military official. This wasn't an exception even for families like theirs, with generals serving out at the borders. After returning to the estate with heavy thoughts weighing on his mind, He Sanlang was met with a cold, dark courtyard. Naturally, he wasn't too happy. He thought back to how he had listened to his grandmother's stories back when he was a young child. She had spoken of her shared love with his grandfather, and how they had overcome all manner of disasters together. He could only find it laughable that he had dreamed of marrying someone like that himself. When he remembered his previous life, he felt that the creatures he couldn't trust the most in this world were women. Underneath those beautiful exteriors laid the hearts of snakes and scorpions. After shutting his eyes for a moment, he heard a set of light footsteps from outside and Liao entered the study soon after. "Young master, here's the sobriety soup. Please drink it quickly while it's hot." He Changdi scanned the table and could only see a bowl of soup and nothing else. He turned his gaze onto Liao, who instantly began to fidget awkwardly, stammering as he reported, "There's nothing already cooked in the kitchen. All the meals were prepared by third young madam and her maidservants these 2 days. So the temporary cooks were sent back and there's only a senior servant left to watch the kitchen. This servant doesn't know how to cook." Google tag. Command push, function, Google tag. Display, div, GPT, add 1505873300429-0. In other words, while there were fresh ingredients in the kitchen, there wouldn't be any supper without a cook. It was in the middle of summer, so to prevent any food from spoiling, they only cooked meals when needed. Furthermore, the food made from Chu Lian's secret recipes was so delicious that no one would leave any leftovers. Liao looked anxious as he carefully watched his master's face. Seeing He Changdi's sinister expression, Liao's pupils flickered as he tried to think of a way to resolve the situation. Young master, this servant saw that there was still something to eat in the kitchen. Liao could only soldier on. The watch servant said that third young madam made some snow fungus and lotus seed porridge. It's sitting on a small fire now, and it's meant for breakfast tomorrow. And she said that it'll only be good once it's brewed long enough. Something that Chu Lian made? That she was keeping to eat all for herself? He Sanlang coldly harumphed and said, "Bring it here." Even if that wicked woman had made it for herself, it would be perfectly reasonable for him to try some of it. Lai Yue had a conflicted expression. This wouldn't be good. What was wrong with third young master? Why did he keep trying to steal third young madam's food? He was like a young child racking his brains, trying everything he could to provoke the person he liked even as she kept ignoring him. Of course, he didn't dare to say something like that out loud. TL note. Lai Yue knows what's up. Snow fungus is also known as Jew's ear or wood ear. Snow fungus and lotus seed porridge. The porridge pic I found doesn't show much of the snow fungus, so here's another pic of the soup alone. Snow fungus and lotus seed soup. This chapter's teaser. Here's the teaser line for this chapter. After waiting under a lush apricot tree in the outer palace, he Sanlang had caught a little girl falling from the apricot tree. Let your imagination go wild. Please let me know if you like these one-line teasers and whether you'd like more. 3. Chapter 60, Abandoning His Wife and Entering the Army, 1. This chapter has been stolen from Valera novels. Please read from the original source. Did you hear me? He Changdi turned the full force of his gaze onto Lai Yue, who froze. The poor manservant replied in agreement and left to carry out his orders, though not without a troubled expression. Halfway to the kitchen, Lai Yue still felt uncomfortable. That look from third young master had been like a firebrand. Even though he hadn't been able to meet eye to eye with that fiery gaze, he still felt tense, as if his skin had been scorched by the encounter. Lai Yue shook his head helplessly. He couldn't understand how the gentle, refined third young master had suddenly turned into this unreadable, fearsome young man. No matter how much the servant in the kitchen pled, Lai Yue still took away the bowl of snow fungus and lotus seed porridge sitting on the stove and brought it to the study. When he brought it to He Sanlang and lifted the porcelain cover, the refreshing, delicious scent of lotus seeds drifted up. The porridge had been cooked until the rice grains were thin and sticky, while the snow fungus had turned translucent. There was no trace of the thick flavor of meat in the porridge. Instead, there were plump, cute lotus seeds mixed in with the grains. Anyone's appetite would have been awakened by the mere sight of it. This kind of porridge really suited the current hot summer. Lai Yue couldn't resist gulping as he watched from the side. He Sanlang, on the other hand, inwardly snorted at the dish's presentation. How had he missed this in his previous life? That wicked woman really knew how to eat well. Serve a bowl for me. Lai Yue scooped some porridge into a small celadone bowl and placed it in front of He Sanlang. Without another word, He Sanlang dug in with his spoon, scooping some porridge into his mouth. Soft, sticky, fragrant, and sweet. It was simple and refreshing to the taste, exactly like its scent. Since He Sanlang hadn't said anything, Lai Yue stood by his side and didn't dare to move away. He watched as his reserved master, who usually didn't have much of an appetite, gulped down bowl after bowl of that snow fungus and lotus seed porridge without any hint of stopping. By the time He Changdi put down his personal bowl, there was nothing left in the original dish that Lai Yue had brought to the study. Not even a single grain remained. Lai Yue's mouth twitched and he lowered his head. He didn't dare to make a single sound and quietly took the bowls away from the study. As he stood outside, Lai Yue looked at the empty bowls and shook his head regretfully. It must have been delicious, based on the way young master had been so heartily eating. What a pity that young master hadn't missed a single drop. Otherwise, maybe Lai Yue could have had a taste of it too. With food in his stomach, especially since it was something that Chu Lian had prepared for herself as next morning's breakfast, He Sanlang's tense mood immediately relaxed into something lighter. When he thought of how that wicked woman would wake up to find that the porridge she had worked so hard to make was gone, he felt positively elated. Now filled with energy, he read some military strategy books for 2 more hours before he finally washed up and went to bed with a light heart. Google Tag. Command Push, Function, Google Tag. Display, div GPT, add 1505873300429-0. Back in the kitchen, When the servant assigned to watch the porridge saw that third young master's personal manservant had forcefully taken it away, she hurriedly ran to report to Senior Servant Gue. Senior Servant Gue nodded and sent the servant back. The next morning, the moment Chu Lian woke up, Senior Servant Gue reported the matter to her. Chu Lian's mouth wordlessly twitched. Conversely, it was Senior Servant Gue who filled in Chu Lian's thoughts. She picked out a hairpin made with kingfisher feathers and inserted it into Chu Lian's hair. Senior Servant Gue smiled as she said, "Third young madam, you must have left that porridge out for third young master on purpose." After getting exposed, Chu Lian's cheeks reddened as she blushed. She pouted. Who would leave something out for that guy to eat? Didn't he eat before coming back? Senior Servant Gue smiled and stopped speaking, understanding that the young lady was too shy to admit it. TL note, I tried to do teasers for a few days, but it's a little troublesome, so I'll stop for now. One last teaser for tomorrow. I'll try to put the time into translating more instead. Love. This chapter's teaser. Here's the teaser line for this chapter. Halfway to the kitchen, Laiwe still felt uncomfortable. That look from third young master had been like a firebrand. Even though he hadn't been able to meet eye to eye with that fiery gaze, he still felt tense, as if his skin had been scorched by the encounter. You know what to do. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.